They say that in war, every soldier eventually finds the place where they belong. For some, it is the chaos of the front lines, where adrenaline becomes a drug and combat becomes a language more fluent than words. For others, it is the quiet professionalism of rear echelon operations, where logistics and supply chains win battles that infantry can only fight. And for a select few, it is the forgotten places, the outposts at the edge of maps, the checkpoints that exist only as coordinates in classified databases, the positions that no one wants because no one believes they matter. Until they do. In war, there are positions that no one wants, outposts so remote that they barely register on operational maps, checkpoints so insignificant that command forgets to include them in morning briefings. And then there are soldiers who are born to stand in those forgotten places, watching the darkness while the rest of the world sleeps. Checkpoint Zeta 3 was one of those places. It sat at the edge of nowhere, a small, fortified position carved into the desert landscape like a wound that refused to heal. To the west, the sand stretched toward an invisible horizon, unbroken by any sign of human habitation. To the south, jagged rock formations rose from the earth like the bones of some ancient creature, casting long shadows that shifted with the movement of the sun and the moon. The nearest friendly base was 47 kilometers to the east. The nearest town was 60 kilometers to the north, and even that was just a collection of mud buildings and suspicious eyes. Everything else was shattered rock and silence. The soldiers who rotated through Zeta 3 often spoke of the strange quality of time in this place. Hours stretched into eternities during the long watches. Days blurred together until the calendar became meaningless. Some men found peace in the isolation, a chance to escape the noise and chaos of larger bases. Others found it maddening, the silence pressing in on their minds until they started seeing threats in every shadow. Most just endured it, counting down the days until they could return to somewhere that felt more like civilization. The checkpoint existed for one reason only. It guarded main supply route Tampa, the single artery of asphalt that fed 3 forward operating bases with everything they needed to survive. Fuel, ammunition, food, medicine. Every truck that rolled through carried the lifeblood of American operations in this godforsaken corner of the world. And every truck had to pass through Zeta 3. Most soldiers called it the forgotten post. The ones who had been stationed there long enough called it something worse. Elena Reeves stood at the northern observation point, her M4 carbine resting against the sandbag wall beside her. She was 26 years old, a specialist with the rank of E4, and she had been watching this same stretch of road for the past 4 months. 123 days, to be exact. She had counted every single one of them, marking the passage of time like a prisoner scratching lines into a cell wall. Not because she wanted to leave. Elena Reeves had stopped wanting things a long time ago. She counted the days because it was something to do, a small ritual that gave structure to the endless monotony. The night pressed in around her like a living thing, thick and heavy, with the kind of silence that made your ears ring. No wind, no insects, no distant engine sounds, just the darkness and the slow crawl of stars across an indifferent sky. She had memorized those stars over the past 4 months. She knew their names, their positions, the ancient stories that different cultures had attached to them. It was another small ritual, another way to fill the hours. Her father had taught her the constellations when she was young, pointing them out from the backyard of their house in Kentucky. She wondered sometimes if he could see them now, wherever he was, if he was anywhere at all. Her fellow soldiers had given her a nickname when she first arrived. Ace. Some said it was because she was the best shot in the platoon, able to put 3 rounds through a playing card at 200 meters. Others said it was because of her face, the way she never showed what she was thinking, like a poker player holding a winning hand. Elena never corrected either story, let them believe what they wanted. The truth was simpler and more painful, but she kept that to herself. She lifted her night vision optics and scanned the road for the 100th time that hour. The green-tinted world revealed nothing but empty pavement stretching into the distance, flanked by shallow drainage ditches and the occasional scrub brush that somehow survived in this wasteland. Everything looked exactly as it should. So why did her gut tell her something was wrong? Elena had learned to trust that feeling a long time ago. Her father had taught her that instincts were nothing more than your brain processing information faster than your conscious mind could follow. When something felt wrong, it usually meant you had already seen the threat without realizing it. The trick was figuring out what your subconscious had noticed before the danger announced itself. She lowered the optics and listened. The silence was absolute, too absolute. Even on the quietest nights, there was usually something. The distant bark of a wild dog, the rustle of a sand viper hunting for mice, the creak of cooling metal from the vehicles parked inside the compound. Tonight there was nothing at all, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Behind her, the checkpoint compound hummed with the quiet activity of a night shift winding down. Two Humvees sat in the motor pool, their engines cold. A guard tower rose from the eastern corner, manned by Private Chen, who was probably fighting to stay awake after 12 hours on duty. The communications bunker glowed with the blue light of multiple screens, where Corporal Williams monitored the radio frequencies and pretended he was not reading his Bible between transmissions. And somewhere in the command post, Master Sergeant Frank Dalton was doing what he always did at this hour, checking on his people, making sure everyone was where they needed to be, preparing for the next day even though the current one was not yet finished. Elena thought about Dalton and felt something close to affection, though she would never admit it out loud. He was 54 years old, with 30 years of service that had taken him from the jungles of Central America to the mountains of Afghanistan to this forgotten patch of sand. His hair had gone gray a decade ago. His knees ached when the weather changed. He walked with a slight limp from a piece of shrapnel that was still lodged somewhere near his hip because the doctors said removing it would cause more damage than leaving it alone. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the world who mattered, a way of listening that made even the youngest private feel like their opinions were valued. He never raised his voice, never lost his temper, never showed anything other than calm professionalism in even the most chaotic situations. The younger soldiers worshipped him. The officers respected him. Even the enemy, those who had faced him in combat and survived, spoke of Master Sergeant Dalton with a grudging admiration that transcended the boundaries of conflict. 2 nights ago, Elena had been on guard duty when she heard music coming from the common area. She had walked over to find Dalton, Williams, and Chen sitting around a makeshift table, playing poker with a deck of cards that was so worn the faces were barely visible. Dalton had waved her over, dealt her in without asking, and for the next 2 hours they had played and talked and laughed like they were sitting in a bar somewhere, instead of a combat outpost in the middle of a war zone. It was during that game that Elena had learned about Dalton's past. His wife, Margaret, had been a nurse at Fort Bragg when they met. They were married for 28 years before the cancer took her. His son, Michael, had followed him into the Army, becoming an infantry officer who deployed to Iraq in 2006. He was killed by a roadside bomb 3 months into his deployment. He was 24 years old. Dalton had not cried when he told the story. His voice had remained steady, his eyes fixed on the cards in his hand. But Elena had seen the grief there, buried deep beneath layers of discipline and duty. She recognized it because she carried the same grief herself. Most soldiers his age had already retired. They were sitting on porches somewhere in Tennessee or Texas, drinking beer and telling stories about the old days to grandchildren who pretended to listen. But Dalton was still here, still wearing the uniform, still watching over soldiers young enough to be his own kids. When Elena had asked him why he had not retired, he had just shrugged and said that the Army was the only family he had left. His wife had died of cancer in 2015. His son had been killed in Ramadi in 2006. The Army had given him everything and taken everything in equal measure, and now it was all he knew. Elena understood that kind of loss. She understood it better than Dalton probably realized. The memory came without warning, as it always did. One moment she was standing at her post, scanning the darkness for threats. The next moment she was 18 years old again, sitting in her father's garage in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, watching him work on a piece of equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The garage had been his sanctuary. Her mother used to joke that he spent more time there than in the house, and it was probably true. The walls were lined with tools, each one in its designated place, arranged with the kind of precision that only a man who worked with explosives could appreciate. A workbench dominated the center of the space, its surface scarred by decades of projects and repairs. The smell of motor oil and soldering flux hung in the air, mingling with the faint scent of her mother's roses drifting in through the open door. Chief Warrant Officer Robert Reeves had been a legend in the explosive ordnance disposal community. The soldiers who worked with him said he could defuse a bomb blindfolded. The ones who had trained under him said he had forgotten more about explosives than most technicians would ever learn. He had served for 22 years, survived more than 300 disposal operations, and come home from every deployment with nothing worse than a few new scars and a few more gray hairs. But to Elena, he was just Dad, the man who made pancakes on Saturday mornings and helped her with her homework and sat in the front row at every school play she ever performed in. The man who taught her to throw a baseball and change a tire and read the weather by looking at the clouds. The man who held her when she cried and believed in her when she did not believe in herself. Elena remembered the way his hands moved when he worked. Steady, precise, never rushed, even when the clock was ticking. He used to say that panic was the enemy of precision, and precision was the only thing standing between a disposal technician and a closed casket funeral. She remembered his voice, deep and warm, with a trace of the Kentucky accent he had never quite lost despite decades of moving from base to base. She remembered his laugh, the way it seemed to fill whatever room he was in. She remembered the way he looked at her mother, with a devotion so pure and complete that it made Elena believe in love before she was old enough to understand what the word meant. That day in the garage, he had been teaching her how to identify different types of detonators. It was not official training. She was just a high school senior with no plans to join the military and no particular interest in explosives. But her father believed that knowledge was never wasted, and he wanted her to understand what he did for a living. 5 minutes, he had said, holding up a training device that beeps softly in his palm. That is all the time most bombs give you. 5 minutes from the moment you realize what you are dealing with to the moment it goes off. Some give you more, some give you less. But 5 minutes is the window you should always assume you have. Elena had asked him what happened if 5 minutes was not enough. Her father had smiled that sad smile he always wore when he talked about his work. Then you make it enough, he had said. You focus. You prioritize. You cut out everything that does not matter and concentrate on the one thing that does. 5 minutes is a lifetime if you know how to use it. She had not understood what he meant. Not really, not until the day 2 years later when 2 officers in dress uniforms had knocked on her mother's door and delivered the news that changed everything. Chief Warrant Officer Robert Reeves had been killed in action in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. The official report said he had encountered an improvised explosive device of unusual complexity. There had been no warning, no time to evacuate. The device had detonated while he was attempting to render it safe, and he had died instantly. Elena's mother had collapsed in the doorway, a sound escaping her throat that did not seem human. It was the sound of a heart breaking in real time, of 28 years of love and partnership shattering into pieces that could never be put back together. Elena had stood behind her, frozen, feeling something inside her chest turn to ice. She had not cried. Not then, not at the funeral, not when they handed her the folded flag and the posthumous medals and the letter from the president expressing the nation's gratitude. She had simply gone numb, and part of her had stayed that way ever since. Her mother had never recovered. She died 2 years later. The doctors said it was a stroke, but Elena knew the truth. Her mother had died of grief, her body simply giving out after her spirit had already departed. Elena had buried her next to her father in the military cemetery at Fort Campbell, their headstones side by side for eternity. She was 20 years old and completely alone in the world. What the official report did not say, what Elena had only learned years later through whispered conversations and classified documents she was never supposed to see, was that her father's death had not been an accident. The device he had encountered was not a typical insurgent weapon. It was something else entirely, something designed by someone who understood American disposal techniques intimately, someone who had built the bomb specifically to kill the man trying to defuse it. Her father had been murdered, and the killer had never been found. Elena joined the Army 6 months after the funeral. The recruiter had been skeptical at first, a 20-year-old woman with no prior military connection except a dead father whose name she refused to mention. But she had passed every test they threw at her: physical fitness, mental aptitude, psychological evaluation. She had excelled in basic training, earned top marks in advanced individual training, and requested assignment to the most dangerous specialty the Army offered: explosive ordnance disposal, the same job that had killed her father. Her instructors had asked her why. She had told them she wanted to serve her country. She had told them she wanted to follow in her father's footsteps. She had told them she wanted to save lives. All of those things were true, but they were not the whole truth. The whole truth was darker and simpler. She wanted answers. She wanted to understand what had happened in that dusty compound in Kandahar. She wanted to know who had designed the device that killed her father, and why, and how they had known enough about American disposal techniques to create a trap that even the legendary Robert Reeves could not escape. And someday, somehow, she wanted to find the man responsible. The search had consumed her for years. During her deployments, she had collected fragments of information, whispered rumors about a ghost, a former military operative from the Soviet era who had gone mercenary after the Cold War ended, stories about a man who designed explosives the way an artist painted pictures, each device a unique creation crafted for a specific purpose, legends about a phantom who had killed more bomb technicians than anyone could count, always staying one step ahead of every investigation. She had trained as an EOD technician, learning everything her father had known and more. She had deployed 3 times, survived more close calls than she could count, and earned a reputation as someone who could stay calm when everyone else was falling apart. But she had never found the answer she was looking for. The trail had gone cold years ago, buried under layers of classified reports and official indifference. Now she stood at a forgotten checkpoint in the middle of nowhere, watching an empty road and wondering if she would ever know the truth. The radio on her vest crackled to life, breaking her out of the memory. "Ace, you copy?" It was Williams, his voice carrying the soft drawl of rural Alabama. "Sarge wants to see you in the CP when you get a chance." Elena keyed her mic. "On my way." She took one last look at the road, that uneasy feeling still gnawing at her stomach, then turned and walked toward the command post. The compound was small enough that the walk took less than a minute, past the motor pool and the supply shed and the sandbag positions that defined their tiny perimeter. She nodded to Chen as she passed the guard tower. The young private waved back, looking exhausted but alert. Tommy Chen was 22 years old, fresh out of training on his first deployment. He was scared most of the time, though he tried hard not to show it. Elena had taken him under her wing almost without meaning to, showing him how to maintain his weapon and how to read the desert and how to stay awake during the long night watches. He reminded her of herself at that age, all nervous energy and desperate desire to prove himself. She found herself wanting to protect him, even though she knew that protection was something no one could guarantee in a place like this. The command post was a reinforced bunker that smelled like diesel fuel and stale coffee. Dalton was standing at the map table when she entered, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a red pen in his hand. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression made her pause. "Close the door," he said. Elena did as she was told, then crossed the room to stand across the table from him. The map showed their sector in exhaustive detail, with every road and trail and potential ambush site marked in different colors. Dalton had been adding new notations, she noticed. Red circles around several points along MSR Tampa. "What is going on, Sarge?" Dalton took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked tired. Not the normal tired of a long deployment, but something deeper, something that worried her. "I got a call from battalion about an hour ago," he said. "Intel has picked up chatter about a major operation in our sector. They do not know the specifics yet, but they think something big is coming. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. They are still trying to figure it out." Elena felt her pulse quicken slightly, though her face remained calm. "What kind of operation?" "They are not sure." Dalton shook his head. "Could be an attack on the FOBs. Could be an ambush on the supply convoys. Could be nothing at all. You know how Intel is. Half the time they are wrong, and the other half they are so vague that being right does not help anyone. So what do we do?" Dalton looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Uncertainty. Frank Dalton, who had survived 30 years of combat operations, who had seen everything the world's worst places had to offer, looked genuinely unsure of what was coming. "We stay alert," he said finally. "We keep our eyes open, and we be ready to move if the order comes." Elena nodded, understood. She turned to leave, but Dalton's voice stopped her. "Ace, wait." She looked back. Dalton was staring at the map again, his jaw tight. "I have been doing this a long time," he said quietly. "Longer than you have been alive. And I have learned to trust my gut when it tells me something is wrong." He looked up at her. "My gut is screaming right now. I do not know what is out there, but something is coming. Something bad. I can feel it." Elena thought about the silence she had noticed earlier, the too perfect stillness of the desert, the way the night seemed to be waiting for something. I feel it too, she said. Dalton nodded slowly. Then stay sharp out there. And if anything happens, anything at all, you get on that radio immediately. Do not try to be a hero. Do not try to handle it yourself. You call for backup. Understood? Understood, Sarge. She left the command post and walked back toward her observation point, but her mind was racing now. Intel chatter about a major operation, Dalton's uncharacteristic worry, the oppressive silence of the desert. None of it added up to anything specific, but all of it added up to a feeling she could not shake. Something was wrong. She just did not know what yet. The next hour passed slowly. Elena resumed her watch, scanning the road and the surrounding terrain with methodical precision. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. The silence continued, broken only by the occasional burst of static from her radio and the distant hum of the generator that powered the compound. At 0300, Williams brought her a cup of coffee. He was a good kid, Marcus Williams, though kid was perhaps the wrong word for a 24-year-old combat veteran. He had earned his nickname, Preacher, honestly. His father was a Baptist minister in some small town in Alabama that Elena had never heard of, a place called Tuskegee, where everyone knew everyone, and the church was the center of community life. Williams himself carried a worn Bible in his cargo pocket and could quote scripture the way other soldiers quoted movie lines. But he was also a crack shot with a radio, able to establish communications in conditions that would stump most operators. And he never let his faith interfere with his duties. He had told Elena once that he saw no contradiction between serving God and serving in the military. The Lord asks us to protect the innocent, he had said. Sometimes that means putting yourself between them and the people who would do them harm. Elena had not been sure what to say to that. Her own relationship with God had ended the day her father died. But she respected Williams for his conviction, for the way he held on to something larger than himself in a world that seemed designed to strip away everything you believed in. Quiet night, Williams said, handing her the cup. His breath formed small clouds in the cold desert air. Somewhere in the distance, a generator hummed its monotonous rhythm. Too quiet. Elena took a sip. The coffee was bitter and barely warm, but it was better than nothing. The caffeine would help keep her alert for the remaining hours of her watch. 4 more hours until sunrise. 4 more hours of staring into the darkness and waiting for something that might never come. Williams nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the perimeter. He had good instincts, Elena had noticed. The kind of awareness that could not be taught, only developed through experience and natural talent. I was just reading Psalm 23. You know the one. Yeah, Elena knew it. Her father had requested it at his funeral. The valley of the shadow of death. She could still hear the chaplain's voice reciting those ancient words over the flag-draped coffin. Still feel the weight of the folded flag being pressed into her numb hands. Been thinking about that a lot lately, Williams said, walking through the valley, fearing no evil. He paused, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance that only he could see. Sometimes I wonder if the fear is the point. Like maybe we are supposed to be afraid, and the courage is not about not feeling it. It is about walking anyway. Elena looked at him. That is pretty deep for lower 300. Williams shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Long nights give you time to think. Too much time, maybe. Back home, I never thought about this stuff. I was too busy with church activities and school and helping my daddy prepare his sermons. But out here, when it is just you in the darkness and all that silence, you start to ask questions you never thought to ask before. What kind of questions? Williams was quiet for a moment. Questions about purpose, he said finally. About why we are here, not here at this checkpoint, but here, on this earth, in this life. What it all means, if it means anything at all. Elena did not have an answer for him. She was not sure anyone did. He headed back to the communications bunker, and Elena returned to her watch. But his words stayed with her, turning over in her mind. The valley of the shadow of death. She had been walking through that valley for a long time now, ever since the day her father died. Maybe her whole life had been preparation for this, for whatever was coming. Or maybe she was just a soldier at a forgotten checkpoint, looking for meaning in a universe that offered none. At 0341, the radio exploded with urgent chatter. All units, all units. This is Sentinel Command. Immediate evacuation order for FOB Sentinel and all attached positions. Repeat, Immediate evacuation. All personnel are to withdraw to Rally Point Alpha immediately. You have 5 minutes to evacuate. Repeat, 5-minute window for complete withdrawal. Elena grabbed her radio. Sentinel Command, this is Checkpoint Zeta 3. Confirm evacuation order. The response came back instantly, tight with barely controlled urgency. Confirmed Zeta 3. Intel indicates imminent large-scale attack on all positions. Threat level is critical. Begin evacuation immediately. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. 5 minutes is a lifetime if you know how to use it. Behind her, the compound erupted into controlled chaos. She could hear Dalton shouting orders, engines turning over, boots pounding on packed earth. The choreography of evacuation was something every soldier knew by heart. It was drilled into muscle memory until it became automatic. Grab your gear, secure sensitive equipment, get to the vehicles, move out. Elena should have been running with the rest of them. She should have been grabbing her pack and sprinting for the Humvees and getting the hell out of this forgotten outpost before whatever was coming arrived to kill them all. Instead, she stayed at her post. She did not know why. Instinct, maybe. That nagging feeling that had been bothering her all night. She raised her night vision optics and scanned the road one more time, and this time she saw something that made her blood run cold. Movement. Not on the road, below it. The access bridge that carried MSR Tampa over a dry riverbed was perhaps 200 meters from the checkpoint. It was a simple structure, concrete and steel, strong enough to support the heavy supply trucks that used the route. During the day, you could see the drainage culvert that ran beneath it, a channel carved into the rock to handle flash floods during the rare rainy season. Someone was in that culvert. Elena adjusted her optics, pushing the magnification to its limits. The green-tinted world became grainy and indistinct, but she could still make out shapes moving in the shadows beneath the bridge. Multiple figures, at least 5, maybe more. They were clustered around the support pylons, doing something she could not quite see. Her finger found the transmit button on her radio. Sentinel Command, this is Zeta 3. I have visual contact with unknown personnel beneath the MSR Tampa Bridge. Multiple individuals, possible hostile activity. A pause, then the response confused. Zeta 3, we show no contacts in your area. Drone sweep was negative. Corridor is green. Elena's jaw tightened. Negative, Command. I have eyes on target. At least 5 individuals beneath the bridge structure. They are doing something to the support pylons. Another pause, longer this time. Zeta 3, our sensors show no heat signatures in that area. Are you certain of what you are seeing? She was certain. More certain than she had ever been of anything. And suddenly she understood why the sensors showed nothing. Thermal blankets. The enemy was using thermal masking to hide their heat signatures from drone observation. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated countermeasure that regular insurgents did not have. Command, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. Confirm status on bridge structural sensors. A moment of silence. Then a different voice strained with something that sounded like fear. Zeta 3, bridge sensors went offline approximately 10 minutes ago during a power fluctuation. We are working to restore them. 10 minutes. The timeline suddenly made terrible sense. The sensors had gone dark. The evacuation order had been issued, and someone had used that window to infiltrate the bridge and plant explosives on the support structure. If the bridge went down, the evacuation convoy would be cut off. Hundreds of soldiers trying to escape whatever attack was coming would find themselves trapped on the wrong side of a destroyed crossing. The supply route that fed 3 forward operating bases would be severed. The entire defensive position of American forces in this sector would collapse like a house of cards. Elena made a decision. Command, she said. I am moving to investigate. Hostile activity confirmed beneath the bridge. Possible explosive emplacement in progress. The response was immediate and sharp. Negative Zeta 3, maintain evacuation protocol. Repeat, maintain evacuation protocol. You have 3 minutes remaining. Behind her, she could hear the Humvees roaring to life. The evacuation was proceeding as ordered. Everyone was doing exactly what they were supposed to do. Everyone except her. Elena pulled her M4 from the sandbag wall, checked the magazine, and started moving toward the bridge. She knew she was disobeying a direct order. She knew she was putting herself in danger. She knew that what she was doing went against every protocol and every regulation she had sworn to uphold. But she also knew that if she did not act, if she simply climbed into a Humvee and drove away while enemy sappers planted explosives beneath that bridge, people would die. A lot of people. And she could not live with that. The desert floor was hard and uneven beneath her boots. She moved quickly but carefully, using what little cover the terrain provided. A shallow depression here, a cluster of rocks there. The darkness was her ally now, hiding her approach from the figures beneath the bridge. She was perhaps 100 meters out when her radio crackled with a voice she did not recognize. It was not command. It was not anyone from her unit. It was a man's voice, calm and cultured, speaking English with an accent she immediately identified as Russian. Specialist Reeves, the voice was almost amused. The daughter of Robert Reeves. I was wondering when you would notice us. Elena froze, her blood turned to ice in her veins. Yes, the voice continued. I know who you are. I have known for a very long time. Your father was a remarkable man, the best explosive ordnance disposal technician the American military ever produced. It was almost a shame to kill him. The world seemed to stop. Elena could not breathe, could not think. The words echoed in her skull like thunder, drowning out everything else. Kill him. This man had killed her father. This voice on the radio belonged to the person she had been hunting, consciously or unconsciously, for the past 8 years. He had 5 minutes at that compound in Kandahar, the voice said. 5 minutes to figure out my design and save himself. He almost did it too. He was very close. But in the end, 5 minutes was not enough. Elena found her voice. It came out steady, despite the chaos inside her. Who are you? A soft laugh. My name is Dmitri Volkov. I am sure you have never heard of me. Your intelligence agencies have tried very hard to pretend I do not exist. But I assure you I am very real. And now, Specialist Reeves, you have a choice to make. Elena started moving again, slower now, her rifle raised. The figures beneath the bridge had stopped what they were doing. They knew she was there. You have approximately 4 minutes before my charges detonate, Volkov continued. You can retreat to your vehicles and evacuate with the rest of your unit. You will survive. The bridge will fall. Your convoy will be trapped. Many of your fellow soldiers will die in the attack that follows, but you will live. She kept moving, 90 meters now. Or, Volkov said, you can try to stop us. You can come down here and attempt to disarm explosives that were designed by the same man who killed your father. You can see if you are better than he was. See if 5 minutes is enough for you when it was not enough for him. 80 meters. Elena keyed her radio on the squad frequency. Dalton, Sarge, if you can hear me, there are hostiles beneath the bridge. Explosive emplacement confirmed. I am moving to intercept. A burst of static, then Dalton's voice, tight with concern. Ace, get back here. That is an order. Negative, Sarge, there is no time. If this bridge goes, the convoy is dead. Damn it, Ace, another burst of static. Hold your position. I am coming to you. Elena kept moving, 70 meters. Volkov's voice returned, still calm, still amused. Brave. Foolish, but brave. Your father would be proud. Or perhaps he would tell you to run. That is what a sensible man would do. But then you are not a sensible woman, are you, Specialist Reeves? You are here at this forgotten outpost because you want to find the truth. You want to know why he died. You want to understand. 60 meters. So let me tell you, Volkov said. Your father died because he was good at his job. Too good. He had started to notice patterns in the explosives we were using. He was piecing together our network, our methods, our supply chains. If he had lived, he would have exposed everything. So I designed a device specifically for him, a puzzle that he could not resist trying to solve. And when he committed himself to solving it, when he was too focused on the challenge to recognize a trap, I took him from you. 50 meters. Elena could see them clearly now. 6 figures in dark clothing clustered around the bridge supports. They had stopped working on the explosives and were turning to face her, weapons coming up. She dropped into a prone position behind a small rise in the ground, her rifle steady against her shoulder. This is your 5 minutes, Specialist Reeves, Volkov said. Let us see what you do with them. The first shot cracked through the night, kicking up sand a meter to her left. Elena returned fire. 2 controlled bursts that sent the enemy diving for cover. The suppressive fire from the bridge stopped as the hostiles tried to locate her position in the darkness. She keyed her radio one more time. Command, this is Zeta 3. Hostile contact confirmed. Multiple shooters beneath the MSR Tampa Bridge. Explosive charges are being placed on the structural supports. I am engaging. The response was lost in a wave of gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the night as the enemy opened up on her position with everything they had. She pressed herself into the sand, feeling bullets snap through the air above her head, and thought about her father. 5 minutes. She had less than that now. But for the first time since she had heard the news of his death, Elena knew exactly what she needed to do. She rose from cover, rifle blazing, and started running toward the bridge. Behind her, the first Humvee of the evacuation convoy roared past on MSR Tampa, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver had no idea that the road ahead was about to become a killing ground. And somewhere in the shadows beneath the bridge, Dmitri Volkov watched the daughter of his greatest victim racing toward him and smiled. The clock was ticking. 4 minutes. The desert floor rose up to meet Elena as she ran, each footfall sending small clouds of dust into the darkness behind her. Her lungs burned with the cold night air, that peculiar chill that descends on the desert after midnight when the sun's heat has bled away into the endless sky. Her rifle was heavy in her hands, slapping against her chest with every stride, the familiar weight of it both a comfort and a reminder of what lay ahead. Ahead of her, the bridge loomed like a skeletal giant against the star-filled sky, its concrete supports casting long shadows across the dry riverbed below. She had crossed that bridge hundreds of times over the past 4 months, watching convoy after convoy roll across its worn surface without ever giving much thought to the structure itself. Now it dominated her vision, a massive monument of steel and concrete that held the fate of everyone she cared about in its gray embrace. She was 50 meters out now. The muzzle flashes from beneath the bridge had stopped. The enemy knew she was coming. They were repositioning, preparing to meet her assault with the kind of professional discipline that told her everything she needed to know about who she was facing. These were not insurgents. These were not local fighters with homemade weapons and improvised tactics. These were trained operators, mercenaries who had done this kind of work before, who understood that the next few minutes would determine whether they lived or died. Elena could feel their eyes on her, tracking her movement through the darkness. She imagined them communicating in hand signals and whispered commands, coordinating their defense with the efficiency of men who had worked together many times before. Part of her respected their professionalism. A larger part of her wanted to kill every single one of them. Elena dropped into a shallow depression in the ground, pressing herself flat against the earth. The sand was cold against her cheek, gritty and real, grounding her in the present moment. Her breathing was ragged but controlled. She forced herself to slow it down, to regulate the oxygen flowing to her muscles and her brain. Panic was the enemy of precision. Her father's voice echoed in her memory like a prayer. Panic gets you killed, Ace. Precision keeps you alive. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice low and steady. Zeta 3 to any friendly unit. I am 40 meters south of the MSR Tampa Bridge. Multiple hostiles beneath the structure. Explosive charges confirmed on support pylons. Requesting immediate backup. The seconds that followed felt like hours. Static crackled in her earpiece, the empty hiss of radio waves searching for a signal. She pressed herself deeper into the depression, making herself as small a target as possible while she waited for a response. Above her, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. Static answered her for a long moment. Then a voice cut through the noise, familiar and steady despite the chaos of the evacuation happening behind them. Ace, this is Ironside. Hold your position. We are inbound. 90 seconds. Dalton. Of course it was Dalton. The old master sergeant had not evacuated with the rest of the convoy. He had heard her transmission about the bridge and had done exactly what Elena knew he would do. He had turned around and come back for her. That was the kind of man he was. That was why she trusted him more than anyone else in the world. Copy that, Sarge. Holding position. Elena lifted her head just enough to observe the bridge through her night vision optics. The green-tinted world revealed movement in the shadows beneath the span. At least 6 figures, maybe more, working quickly around the concrete pylons. Their movements were precise, coordinated, the kind of efficiency that comes from extensive rehearsal. She could see the shapes of explosive charges already in place. Rectangular blocks of what looked like C4 plastic explosive wired together in a configuration designed to bring down the entire structure with a single detonation. 20 pounds, she estimated. Maybe more. enough to shatter the concrete and drop the entire span into the riverbed below. Any vehicle on the bridge when it went would be crushed. Any vehicle approaching would find itself trapped on the wrong side of a gap that no truck could cross. They were almost done. If she waited for Dalton, if she gave them another 90 seconds to complete their work, it would be too late. The convoy would be cut off, the supply line would be severed, and people would die. A lot of people. She made her decision the same way she made every decision in combat. Quickly, decisively, without second guessing. Elena rose from a cover and sprinted forward, her rifle barking 3 round bursts at the figures beneath the bridge. The enemy scattered, diving for cover behind the support pylons and returning fire with a discipline that confirmed her worst suspicions. Bullets snapped past her head, close enough that she could hear them cutting the air. She threw herself behind a concrete drainage marker and pressed her back against the cold stone, her heart pounding against her ribs. The exchange of gunfire continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Elena fired when she had a target, ducked when she did not, and tried to keep track of how many hostiles she had seen. 6 confirmed, maybe 7. All of them armed with weapons that sounded like AK variants. The distinctive crack of the 7.62 millimeter rounds echoing across the empty desert. She was outgunned and outnumbered. The smart thing to do was wait for backup. The smart thing to do was maintain her position and provide covering fire until Dalton arrived with reinforcements. But the smart thing was not always the right thing. Elena looked at her watch. 3 minutes and 47 seconds since the evacuation order. The convoy was still rolling. Trucks and Humvees and personnel carriers streaming past on MSR Tampa, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they fled toward Rally Point Alpha. She could hear the rumble of their engines in the distance, a sound of salvation for some and potential death for others. If the bridge went down now with vehicles still on it, the death toll would be catastrophic. Dozens of soldiers would die in an instant, their bodies buried under tons of concrete and steel. She had to get to those charges. She had to stop the detonation before it was too late. The sound of engines reached her ears, different from the convoy vehicles. Closer, more urgent. Coming from the checkpoint behind her, she risked a glance over her shoulder and saw headlights bouncing across the desert terrain, a single Humvee racing toward her position with its lights on high beam. The vehicle was moving fast, faster than was safe on the uneven ground, kicking up a rooster tail of dust that caught the starlight like a comet's wake. Dalton, the enemy, saw it too. The gunfire intensified, rounds pinging off the concrete marker and kicking up dust all around her. They were trying to keep her pinned down while they finished their work. Bullets cracked past her head, so close she could feel the wind of their passage. One struck the rock beside her face, showering her with fragments of stone that stung like angry wasps. Elena keyed her radio again. "Sarge, they are almost done with the charges. I need to move now." Dalton's voice came back immediately, calm despite the situation. The voice of a man who had faced death so many times that it no longer held any surprise for him. "Understood, Ace. We will provide cover. On my mark." The Humvee skidded to a stop 50 meters behind her position, its tires throwing up a spray of sand and gravel. Doors flew open before the vehicle had fully stopped. She heard the distinctive sound of an M249 squad automatic weapon being deployed, its bipod legs snapping into place against the vehicle's hood. Preacher. It had to be Preacher on the saw. Nobody else in the squad could handle that weapon the way he could. He could put rounds on target at 400 meters while quoting scripture between bursts. She heard Tommy's voice in the background, young and tight with fear, but holding steady. "Where do you want me, Sarge?" "Right flank. Keep your head down and your eyes open." "Ready when you are, Sarge." Elena pressed herself deeper into her cover, preparing to move. 3, 2, 1, mark. The saw opened up with a roar that seemed to shake the earth itself. 5.56 millimeter rounds tore through the darkness in a continuous stream, the muzzle flash strobing like lightning as Preacher walked his fire across the base of the bridge. The sound was enormous, a physical force that pressed against Elena's eardrums and made her teeth vibrate. At the same time, she heard the crack of Dalton's M4 and the higher-pitched report of what had to be Tommy Chen's weapon joining the symphony of suppressive fire. The enemy fire slackened immediately. Nobody, no matter how well trained, could maintain an aggressive posture against that kind of suppressive barrage. The mercenaries beneath the bridge were diving for cover, pressing themselves against the concrete pylons, trying to survive the storm of lead that Dalton and his team were pouring into their position. Elena ran. She covered the remaining 30 meters in what felt like a single heartbeat, her boots pounding against the hard-packed earth, her lungs screaming for air. Bullets flew around her, but none found their mark. The covering fire from her squad was too intense, too accurate, forcing the enemy to keep their heads down while she sprinted toward the bridge. She felt invincible in that moment, carried forward by momentum and adrenaline, and the certain knowledge that her friends were watching over her. She reached the edge of the drainage culvert and threw herself over the lip, sliding down the rocky embankment on her back until she hit the bottom in a cloud of dust and gravel. The world spun for a moment, stars and sand and shadows whirling together in a dizzy kaleidoscope. Then it stabilized. She was under the bridge now, in the shadows beneath the span, surrounded by the concrete pillars that held the structure aloft. The air was different down here. Cooler, damper. It smelled of old concrete and rust and something else. Something chemical that made her nose burn. Explosive residue. The charges were close. And she could see the bombs. There were 4 of them, each one attached to a separate support pylon at what her training told her were the optimal stress points. The placement was textbook perfect, designed to create a cascading structural failure that would bring down the entire bridge in a matter of seconds. The charges were daisy-chained together with det cord, a setup that would ensure all 4 detonated simultaneously when triggered. Each block of explosive was roughly the size of a shoebox, which meant approximately 5 pounds of C4 per charge. 20 pounds total, more than enough to bring down the bridge and everyone on it. Elena moved toward the nearest charge, her eyes scanning the device for the detonation system. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, muscle memory taking over as years of training clicked into place. She had studied hundreds of explosive devices. She had disarmed dozens. But she had never seen anything quite like this. What she saw made her blood run cold. This was not a simple improvised explosive device. This was not the work of insurgents using fertilizer and cell phone triggers. This was something else entirely, something professional, something deadly. The detonator was a sophisticated dual initiation system, combining a radio frequency receiver with a hardwired timer as backup. The wiring was precise, professional, each connection soldered with the kind of care that spoke of experience and expertise. The work of someone who understood explosives at a level that few people in the world could match. And wrapped around the entire assembly was a collapsing circuit. Elena's breath caught in her throat. A collapsing circuit was an anti-tamper device, designed to trigger the charge if anyone tried to remove or disarm it. The concept was simple but deadly. The circuit maintained a constant flow of electricity through a wire loop. If that flow was interrupted for any reason, if someone cut the wrong wire or jostled the device too roughly, the circuit would collapse and send a trigger signal to the detonator. It was one of the most sophisticated anti-tamper mechanisms in existence, and someone had installed it on a bomb designed to kill American soldiers. She had seen this design before, not in person but in classified briefings and training and materials at Fort Lee, where EOD technicians learned about the most dangerous bomb makers in the world. This was the signature of a specific individual, a ghost who had been operating in various conflict zones for more than 2 decades. The intelligence community called him the engineer. The soldiers who had faced his work and survived called him something else. The devil. Her father had mentioned him once, years ago, in one of their garage sessions. There is a bomb maker out there, he had said, someone who has been at this longer than most of us have been alive. His devices are works of art. Terrible, beautiful, deadly works of art. If you ever encounter one of his creations, you will know it. And if you are smart, you will run. Elena had not run. She had sprinted toward the danger instead. And now she was standing face to face with the devil's handiwork, with less than 2 minutes to figure out how to stop it. And now Elena understood why Volkov had known her name, why he had spoken of her father with such familiarity. Her father had been tracking this bomb maker before his death. He had been piecing together the pattern, identifying the signature, getting closer to exposing the network that supplied these devices to terrorists and insurgents around the world. That was why they had killed him, not because of what he had done, but because of what he was about to do. He had gotten too close to the truth, and someone had decided he needed to die. Elena forced the realization aside and focused on the task at hand. She had maybe 2 minutes before the timer reached zero. Maybe less. She could see the digital display counting down, red numbers glowing in the darkness like the eyes of some malevolent creature. Each second that ticked away was another heartbeat closer to catastrophe. 147, 146, 145. Her hands moved without conscious thought, falling back on the training that had been drilled into her over years of practice. First step was identifying the anti-tamper device. The collapsing circuit was connected to the main charge via a thin copper wire that ran along the edge of the detonator housing. If she cut the wrong wire, if she disturbed the circuit in any way, the bomb would explode. But she had been taught by the best. Her father had shown her how to defeat this exact type of device, sitting in their garage in Kentucky, using training aids that mimicked the real thing. She could still hear his voice in her head, guiding her through the process. The collapsing circuit relies on continuous current flow. If the current is interrupted, the circuit collapses and triggers the detonator. But there is always a bypass, always a way around the trap. You just have to find it. Elena pulled her knife from its sheath and examined the wiring more closely. There, a junction box where the anti-tamper circuit connected to the main detonator. If she could bypass the junction, she could disable the anti-tamper without triggering the collapse. She worked quickly, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Strip the insulation from 2 parallel wires. Create a bridge connection that would maintain current flow even when the main circuit was cut. Test the connection with the multimeter on her tactical vest. 112, 111, 110. The bypass held. Elena exhaled slowly and moved to the next step. Above her, the firefight continued. She could hear the saw still hammering away, interspersed with the crack of individual rifles and the shouts of men in combat. Someone was yelling in a language she did not recognize. Russian, maybe, or something Eastern European. It did not matter. All that mattered was the bomb in front of her. She cut the anti-tamper circuit. Nothing happened. The bypass was working. Now for the detonator itself. The radio frequency receiver was the primary trigger, designed to respond to a specific coded signal that would detonate the charges on command. Elena located the antenna, a thin wire running up the side of the pylon, and severed it with her knife. One trigger down. The timer was still counting. 052, 051, 050. She traced the hardwired connection from the timer to the detonator, looking for the safest point to make her cut. The wiring was deliberately complex, designed to confuse and delay anyone attempting to disarm the device. But Elena saw through the confusion. She recognized the pattern. Her father had taught her to see past the noise and focus on what mattered. There, the main power feed from the timer to the detonator. If she cut it, the countdown would become meaningless. The timer could reach zero, but without power to the detonator, nothing would happen. She positioned her knife blade against the wire. And then her radio crackled to life. "You are doing well, Specialist Reeves." The voice was calm, almost conversational. Volkov. She could hear him clearly despite the gunfire above, as if he were standing right next to her instead of somewhere in the darkness beyond the bridge. "Better than your father did. He never made it past the anti-tamper circuit." Elena did not respond. She kept her eyes on the wire, her knife steady against the insulation. "He was very focused at the end," Volkov continued. "Very determined. He knew what was at stake. He knew that if he failed, people would die. But that is the terrible burden of the bomb technician, is it not? You carry the weight of every life that hangs in the balance. Every second that ticks away is another heartbeat you might not save." 038, 0037, 036. "Your father stopped talking to me at the end, just like you are doing now. He shut out everything except the device in front of him. It was admirable in its way, professional to the last." Elena's jaw tightened. Her hand trembled slightly, then steadied. "But he made a mistake," Volkov said. "He was so focused on the obvious solution that he did not see the secondary trap. The fail-safe hidden inside the fail-safe. And when he cut that final wire, Ace, do not listen to him." A different voice now. Dalton. He must have been monitoring the enemy frequency, listening to Volkov's taunts. "Focus on the job. You know what you are doing. Trust your training." Elena took a breath. Let it out slowly. Her father's voice joined Dalton's in her memory, a chorus of calm wisdom cutting through the fear. 5 minutes is a lifetime if you know how to use it. She cut the wire. 0:24, 0:23, 0:22. The timer kept counting. Elena stared at it, waiting for the explosion that did not come. The numbers continued their descent, but the bomb remained silent. She had done it. She had disabled the primary detonation system. But something was wrong. A second display flickered to life on the side of the detonator housing. A backup timer she had not seen before, hidden beneath a layer of protective casing that had come loose when she disabled the primary system. This one was not counting down from minutes. It was counting down from 30 seconds. 0:28, 0:27, 0:26. Elena's heart lurched in her chest, the secondary failsafe. Volkov had not been lying. There was another trap, another layer of protection designed to catch anyone who made it past the first line of defense. The device was like a Russian nesting doll, each layer hiding another surprise, each solution creating a new problem. And she had just triggered the final trap. Sarge, her voice was steady despite the terror flooding her system. She would not let fear into her voice. She would not give Volkov that satisfaction. There is a secondary failsafe. 30 seconds. Independent timer. I do not know if I can stop it. Dalton's response came immediately, sharp with urgency. Can you remove the charge? Negative. The anti-tamper is still partially active. If I try to move it, it will blow. The whole setup will go at once. 0:19, 0:18, 0:17. She could hear Dalton breathing on the other end of the radio. She could picture him standing beside the Humvee, his rifle in his hands, his mind racing through options and finding none of them good enough. 30 years of combat experience, and there was nothing he could do to help her now. Nothing except give her an order he knew she would not follow. Then get out of there, Ace. That is an order. Elena looked at the timer, looked at the bridge above her, at the massive concrete span that carried the road across the dry riverbed, looked at the convoy vehicles still streaming past, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they fled towards safety. She could hear the rumble of their engines, feel the vibration of their passage through the structure above her head. Each truck carried a dozen soldiers. Each Humvee carried 4 or 5. If the bridge went down now with vehicles still on it, dozens of men would die. If she ran now, if she abandoned the device and sprinted for cover, she might survive. The bridge would fall, the convoy would be cut off, people would die, but she would live. That was not a trade she was willing to make. Not today, not ever. Negative, Sarge, I am staying. She heard him curse over the radio, a string of words that would have made a drill sergeant blush. Words she had never heard him use before, not in 4 months of serving under his command. She realized in that moment how much she meant to him, how much all of them meant to him. The squad was his family, she was his family, and he was about to watch her die. Then his voice came back, tighter now, strained with emotion he could not quite control. Ace, listen to me. You cannot save everyone. Sometimes you have to let go. Sometimes you have to accept that there are limits to what one person can do. 0:12, 0:11, or 10. Not today, Sarge. She almost smiled as she said it. For the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. She knew exactly who she was and what she had to do. There was no fear anymore. Only clarity. Elena dropped her knife and grabbed the wiring harness with both hands. She did not have time to trace the circuits, did not have time to find the bypass, did not have time to do anything except act on instinct and hope. Her father had taught her that sometimes when all the rules failed, when all the training proved inadequate, you had to trust yourself. You had to believe that your hands would know what to do even when your mind could not follow. She pulled. The wires resisted for a moment, their plastic insulation gripping the mounting brackets with surprising strength. Then they tore free from the detonator housing in a shower of sparks and plastic fragments. Pain lanced through her palms as the sharp edges of the wiring cut into her flesh, drawing blood that dripped onto the dusty ground beneath the bridge. But she did not let go. She kept pulling, ripping out everything she could reach, destroying the careful connections that linked the timer to the explosive charge. 0:05, 0:04, 0:03. She could see the secondary timer display clearly now, its red numbers counting down to 0 with mechanical indifference. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second. She thought of her father, wondered if he had felt this same strange calm in his final moments, wondered if he had known that he was about to die. The secondary timer reached 0. Nothing happened. For a long moment, Elena could not comprehend what had occurred. She had expected the flash of light, the wave of heat, the crushing impact of the explosion. She had expected to tee. Instead, she lay in the dust beneath the bridge, her chest heaving, her hands slick with blood, staring at the silent device. The timer display had gone dark. The explosives remained inert. The bridge still stood. She had done it. She had beaten the devil's trap. For a long moment, she could not move. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past few minutes drained away like water from a broken vessel, leaving her hollow and trembling. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The sounds of gunfire above had faded, replaced by the distant rumble of the convoy vehicles and the ringing silence of the desert night. Then her radio crackled. Ace, Dalton's voice was rough, raw, with something that might have been relief or fear or both. Status report. Elena pushed herself up on her elbows, wincing at the pain that shot through her lacerated palms. Charge neutralized, she said. Bridge is secure. Copy that. Outstanding work, Specialist. The words sounded strange coming from Dalton, too formal, too military. Then his voice softened, becoming the voice of the man rather than the soldier. Now get your ass back up here before I come down there and drag you out myself. She almost smiled. Almost. Roger that, Sarge. On my way. Elena pulled herself to her feet, wincing as the movement sent fresh waves of pain through her lacerated hands. She looked at the disabled device one more time, memorizing every detail of its construction, filing away the information for the intelligence analysts who would want to examine it later. The wiring, the detonator, the clever arrangement of primary and secondary systems designed to defeat even the most skilled technician. Someone had built this device to kill her father, and now she had defeated it. There was a kind of poetry in that, she thought, a closing of the circle. Then she started climbing back up the embankment. She was halfway up, her fingers digging into the rocky soil for purchase, when she heard the shot. It was different from the others, louder and more distinct. A heavy caliber rifle, fired from somewhere in the darkness beyond the bridge. The sound reached her ears a split second before she heard Preacher screaming into the radio, his voice cracking with horror and disbelief. Ironside down, Sarge is hit. Elena's blood turned to ice. She scrambled up the remaining distance, her torn hands screaming in protest as she grabbed rocks and roots and anything else she could find. When she crested the lip of the culvert, she saw a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Dalton was lying on his back beside the Humvee, his body armor torn open, blood pooling beneath him in a spreading stain. Preacher was kneeling beside him, pressing both hands against a wound in the master sergeant's abdomen, trying to stem the flow of blood that pulsed between his fingers with every heartbeat. Tommy Chen was on the radio, his voice cracking as he called for medevac, his words tumbling over each other in desperate urgency. Elena ran. She covered the distance in seconds, dropping to her knees beside Dalton, her eyes scanning the wound with the clinical detachment that training provides. The bullet had entered just below the edge of his body armor, punching through the soft tissue of his lower abdomen. It was a bad hit. Maybe survivable, maybe not. It depended on what the round had hit on its way through. Sarge. She grabbed his hand, squeezed it tight. Stay with me. Medevac is coming. Dalton's eyes found hers. His face was pale, beaded with sweat, but his gaze was still focused, still alert. Did you stop it? Elena felt tears burning in her eyes. Yes, Sarge. The bridge is secure. Good. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. That is good. Do not talk. Save your strength. Dalton shook his head slightly. Listen to me, Ace. He coughed, and a trickle of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. This is not over. Volkov is still out there. He wanted this to happen. He wanted to test you. I know. He will come back. He will try again. And when he does, Dalton's grip tightened on her hand. You have to be ready. You have to finish what your father started. I will, Sarge, I promise. The sound of helicopter rotors reached her ears, growing louder by the second. She looked up and saw the navigation lights of a Black Hawk approaching from the east, its searchlights sweeping across the desert as it zeroed in on their position. The medevac was here. The next few minutes passed in a blur of organized chaos. The helicopter touched down in a storm of dust and rotor wash. A medical team poured out, rushing toward Dalton with stretchers and trauma bags. Elena stepped back to give them room, watching as they worked with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times before. They loaded Dalton onto the stretcher and carried him toward the waiting helicopter. Just before they lifted him inside, he turned his head and caught Elena's eye. "Finish it, Ace." His voice was barely audible over the roar of the rotors. "For both of us." Then he was gone, the helicopter lifting into the night sky and banking toward the field hospital at Phobia B Sentinel. Elena stood in the wash of its departure, her bloody hands hanging at her sides, watching until the navigation lights disappeared into the darkness. Preacher appeared beside her. His uniform was soaked with Dalton's blood. His face was drawn and pale, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "He is going to make it. He is too stubborn to die." Elena did not respond. She was staring at the bridge, at the structure that still stood despite everything Volkov had thrown at it. She had won this round. She had stopped the detonation and saved the convoy and kept the supply line open. But Dalton was right. This was not over. This was just the beginning. Her radio crackled one more time, a familiar voice, calm and amused despite the failure of his operation. "Impressive, Specialist Reeves. Very impressive. You exceeded my expectations. But this was only a test, you understand, a calibration exercise. I wanted to see what you were capable of. Now I know." Elena keyed her mic. "I am going to find you. I look forward to it. But first, there is something you should understand. Your father came very close to stopping me, closer than anyone has before or since. He was building a case, gathering evidence, preparing to expose our entire network. That is why I had to kill him. Not because he was a threat to me personally, but because he was a threat to something much larger." Elena's jaw tightened. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that this is not about revenge, Specialist. Not for you and not for me. This is about something bigger. Something that has been in motion for a very long time. Your father stumbled onto the edge of it before he died. And now, it seems, you are following in his footsteps." The radio went silent. Elena stood in the darkness for a long moment, processing what she had heard. Then she turned to Preacher. "Get Tommy. We need to secure the bridge and wait for the response team. And get me everything we have on the enemy frequency we intercepted. I want to know where that transmission came from." Preacher nodded. "Roger that." He jogged off toward the Humvee, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. She looked down at her hands, at the blood drying in the creases of her palms. Some of it was hers, some of it was Dalton's. She could not tell which was which anymore. She had won the battle. The bridge was standing. The convoy had made it through. But the war was just beginning, and somewhere out there in the darkness, Dmitri Volkov was waiting for her. Elena clenched her fists, ignoring the pain that shot through her lacerated palms. She made a promise to herself in that moment, standing beside the bridge she had saved, surrounded by the echoes of gunfire and the smell of cordite and blood. She would find him. No matter how long it took, no matter what it cost her, she would track down the man who had killed her father and bring him to justice. Not for revenge, not for satisfaction, but because it was the right thing to do. Because stopping him was the only way to prevent others from suffering the same fate. That was her duty. That was her mission, and she would not rest until it was complete. The first rays of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern horizon when the response team finally arrived. They came in force, a full platoon of infantry supported by armored vehicles and a pair of Apache attack helicopters that circled overhead like mechanical vultures. Colonel Raymond Holt himself led the convoy, his command vehicle rolling to a stop beside the bridge with a precision that spoke of decades of military experience. Elena stood at attention as the colonel approached. He was a tall man, ramrod straight despite his 58 years, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the desert around them. He surveyed the scene with eyes that missed nothing, taking in the bloodstains and bullet holes and the disabled explosive device still attached to the bridge support. "Specialist Reeves," his voice was flat, unreadable. "You want to explain to me why you disobeyed a direct evacuation order?" "Sir, there was an imminent threat to the bridge. If the charges had detonated, the convoy would have been trapped and the supply line severed. I made a tactical decision to engage." "A tactical decision." Holt's expression did not change. "You are an E4 specialist. Tactical decisions are made by officers and senior NCOs. Your job is to follow orders." "Yes, sir." Elena kept her eyes fixed on a point somewhere over the colonel's shoulder. "I understand, sir." Holt was silent for a long moment. Then something shifted in his features, a subtle relaxation of the hard lines around his eyes and mouth. "Master Sergeant Dalton is out of surgery. He is going to make it." Elena felt something loosen in her chest. She had not realized how tightly she had been holding herself until that moment. "Thank you, sir. He asked me to tell you something." Holt paused, and for the first time, something like emotion flickered across his face. "He said you did good, Ace. He said you made him proud." Elena could not speak. She simply nodded, not trusting her voice. The colonel turned and looked at the bridge, at the structure that had very nearly become a mass grave for American soldiers. "The intelligence people will want to examine that device," he said. "It is not like anything we have seen before." The bomb maker knew what he was doing. "His name is Dmitri Volkov," Elena said, "former Spetsnaz. He has been operating as a mercenary and weapons designer for at least 2 decades. And sir," she hesitated, then pressed forward, "he is the one who killed my father." Holt turned back to her. His eyes were sharp now, focused. "How do you know that?" "He told me. Over the radio while I was disarming the device. He wanted me to know. He wanted me to understand that this was personal." The colonel was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Then he nodded slowly. "Get yourself to medical. Specialist. Get those hands looked at. Then get some rest. We are going to have a lot of questions for you when the intelligence people arrive." "Yes, sir." Holt started to turn away, then stopped. "One more thing, Specialist. What you did tonight was reckless. It was insubordinate. It violated every protocol we have for dealing with explosive threats." Elena braced herself for what was coming. "It was also the bravest damn thing I have seen in 30 years of service." The colonel's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "Your father would be proud of you. I knew Robert Reeves, served with him in Afghanistan back in 2009. He was one of the best soldiers I ever met, and I see a lot of him in you." "Thank you, sir." The words came out as barely more than a whisper. "Now get to medical. That is an order." "Yes, sir." Elena turned and walked toward the waiting Humvee, where Preacher and Tommy were already loading their gear. The sun was rising over the desert now, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange and red. It was going to be another hot day, another day of sand and dust and the constant threat of violence. But for now, in this moment, Elena allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. She climbed into the Humvee and closed her eyes as Preacher started the engine. The vehicle began to move, carrying her away from the bridge and toward whatever came next. She did not know what the future held. She did not know where her hunt for Volkov would take her or what she would find when she got there. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning, and she would be ready. The field hospital smelled of antiseptic and blood and the particular kind of exhaustion that settles into a place where death is a daily visitor. Row upon row of beds stretched across the converted warehouse, each one holding a soldier in various stages of recovery. Some were sleeping, their faces slack with the peace of heavy sedation. Others stared at the ceiling with the 1,000-yard gaze of men who had seen things they would spend the rest of their lives trying to forget. Nurses moved between the beds like ghosts, checking vitals and adjusting IV drips, and offering what comfort they could to men who were far from home and far from anyone who loved them. Elena had been sitting in the same plastic chair for 6 hours, watching the monitors beside Dalton's bed trace the rhythm of his heartbeat across their glowing screens. The lines rose and fell with mechanical precision, each peak a small victory, each trough a reminder of how close they had come to losing him. She had memorized the pattern of those lines, the way they spiked and settled, the small irregularities that the nurses said were nothing to worry about. She watched them the way a mother watches a sleeping child, afraid to look away, afraid that the moment she stopped paying attention would be the moment everything fell apart. 48 hours had passed since the bridge, 48 hours since she had defused the bomb and saved the convoy and watched her mentor collapse with a sniper's bullet in his gut. The memory played on a loop in her mind, impossible to escape. The crack of the rifle, Preacher's scream over the radio, the sight of Dalton lying in the dust, his blood soaking into the desert sand, his eyes finding hers with an expression that was equal parts pain and apology. The surgeons had worked on him for 7 hours, removing fragments of copper-jacketed lead from his intestines and repairing the damage to his liver, and stopping the internal bleeding that had nearly killed him twice on the operating table. Elena had paced the hallway outside the operating room for the entire 7 hours, unable to sit, unable to eat, unable to do anything except wait and pray to a God she was not sure she believed in anymore. They said he was stable now, They said he would recover, but they also said he would need at least 6 weeks before he could return to duty. And even then, there were no guarantees. The bullet had done significant damage. At his age, with his history of injuries, there was a real possibility that this deployment would be his last. That 30 years of service would end not in triumph but in forced retirement, a medical discharge that would send him home to a country that barely remembered the wars he had fought. Elena could not imagine an army without Frank Dalton in it. He had been a constant presence in her life since the day she arrived at checkpoint Zeta 3, a rock of stability in a world that seemed determined to crumble around her. He had taught her things about soldiering that they did not teach in training schools, the practical wisdom that only comes from decades of experience. He had listened to her stories about her father without judgment, without pity, with only the quiet understanding of a man who had lost people too. She owed him her life, not just because he had come back for her at the bridge, but because he had given her something to believe in again, a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. In the years since her father's death, she had been drifting, going through the motions of military service without any real direction. Dalton had changed that. He had seen something in her that she had not seen in herself, and he had nurtured it, shaped it, turned it into something that might actually make a difference. Now he was lying in a hospital bed, broken and bleeding, because he had refused to leave her behind. She was still watching him when his eyes opened. For a moment, he simply looked at her, his gaze unfocused as he swam up from the depths of sedation. His pupils were dilated from the pain medication, and his skin had the waxy pallor of someone who had lost a lot of blood. But even through the haze of drugs and exhaustion, Elena could see the sharp intelligence that had made him such an effective leader. He was already assessing, already processing, already trying to figure out what had happened while he was unconscious. Then recognition flickered in his eyes, and something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You look like hell, Ace." Elena almost laughed. She had not showered in 2 days. Her uniform was still stained with his blood, dark patches that had dried stiff against the fabric. The bandages on her hands were dirty and needed changing. The white gauze turned gray and brown with dust and sweat. She probably did look like hell. She certainly felt like it. "You should see the other guy," she said. Dalton's smile faded. His eyes grew serious, the eyes of a soldier who had seen too much to waste time on pleasantries. Even flat on his back in a hospital bed, connected to machines by a tangle of wires and tubes, he was still the same man who had led soldiers into combat for 3 decades. Still the same man who put the mission above everything else, including his own survival. The bridge, still standing. The convoy made it through, no casualties except you. He nodded slowly, processing the information. The movement caused him to wince, a flash of pain crossing his features before he suppressed it. And the bomb maker? Volkov? Gone. Disappeared into the desert before we could track him. Intel is working on it, but so far they have nothing. He vanished like smoke. Dalton was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat that filled the silence between them. Somewhere in the distance, Elena could hear the thump of helicopter rotors as another medevac arrived with another load of wounded soldiers. The war never stopped. The war never even paused. It just kept grinding forward, chewing up lives and spitting out the broken remnants. "Listen to me, Ace." Dalton's voice was rough, weakened by blood loss and surgery, but there was steel beneath the hoarseness. "I have been doing this for 30 years. 30 years of fighting in places most Americans cannot even find on a map. And I have learned to recognize certain patterns, certain truths that never change no matter where you are or who you are fighting." Elena leaned forward. "I am listening. This is not over." Dalton turned his head to look at her directly, his eyes burning with intensity despite his weakened state. What happened at the bridge was not a random attack. It was not an opportunistic strike by some local insurgent group. That was a coordinated operation, planned and executed by professionals. And professionals do not give up after one failure. They learn from it, they adapt, and they come back. "I know, Sarge. Do you?" Dalton's voice sharpened. "Do you really understand what I am telling you? Volkov did not just try to destroy a bridge. He tested you. He wanted to see what you were capable of, how you would react under pressure, whether you could be broken. And now he knows. He knows you are good. He knows you are dangerous. And that makes you a target." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected as much. In the dark hours of the night when sleep would not come and her mind replayed the events at the bridge over and over again. Volkov had spoken to her directly. He had known her name, her history, her connection to her father. That kind of knowledge did not come by accident. He had been studying her, preparing for her, waiting for the moment when their paths would cross. "What do you want me to do, Sarge?" Dalton's hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong despite everything he had been through. "I want you to stop waiting for him to come to you. I want you to go hunting. Find him before he finds you. Take the fight to him on your terms, not his." Elena looked at their joined hands. His skin was papery and pale, traced with IV lines and sensor wires. But the strength in his grip was real. The strength of a man who had spent his entire adult life protecting others. "And if I cannot find him, you will." Dalton's eyes never wavered. "You are Robert Reeves' daughter. You have his instincts, his determination, his refusal to quit. Volkov killed your father because he was getting too close to the truth. Now you are getting close too. He will not be able to resist coming after you. And when he does, you need to be ready." The door to the hospital room opened, and a nurse entered to check Dalton's vitals. Elena released his hand and stood, giving the medical staff room to work. But Dalton's words stayed with her, echoing in her mind like the tolling of a distant bell. Go hunting. She had spent 8 years searching for the man who killed her father. 8 years of dead ends and false leads and official indifference. Now she had a name. She had a face. She had proof that her father's death had been murder, not accident. And she had something else, something that Volkov did not know about. She had seen his work up close. She had touched his bombs with her own hands, traced the pathways of his circuits, understood the logic of his designs. In the language of explosive ordnance disposal, she had looked into his mind and seen how he thought. That was an advantage, a small one perhaps. But in the deadly game they were playing, small advantages could mean the difference between life and death. Elena left the hospital and walked out into the blazing afternoon sun. The forward operating base spread out before her, a small city of tents and prefabricated buildings and armored vehicles baking in the desert heat. Soldiers moved between the structures with the purposeful stride of people who had too much to do and not enough time to do it. Helicopters rose and fell from the landing pads like mechanical dragonflies. The war continued, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded at the bridge, indifferent to the personal battles being fought within its larger conflict. She made her way to the Tactical Operations Center, a squat concrete building that served as the nerve center for all military activity in the sector. Armed guards flanked the entrance, checking identification badges with the bored efficiency of men who had performed the same task 1,000 times before. Elena showed her credentials and was waved through into the cool darkness of the building's interior. Colonel Raymond Holt was waiting for her in the main briefing room. The colonel stood at the head of a long table covered with maps and photographs and intelligence reports. He was a tall man, lean and weathered, with the bearing of someone who had commanded troops in combat and earned their respect through competence rather than rank. 2 silver stars decorated his service record, along with a bronze star, a purple heart, and a list of other commendations that spoke of a career spent at the sharp end of American military power. Specialist Reeves, his voice was measured, neither warm nor cold. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Elena took a chair across from the colonel, her eyes scanning the materials spread across the table. Satellite photographs of desert terrain, intercepted communications transcripts, personnel files with photographs attached, and in the center of it all, a single image that made her heart skip a beat. Dmitri Volkov. The photograph showed a man in his late 40s with close-cropped gray hair and eyes the color of winter ice. His face was angular, almost gaunt, with high cheekbones and a thin mouth that seemed incapable of smiling. He was wearing civilian clothes in the picture, a simple jacket and shirt, but there was nothing civilian about the way he carried himself. This was a soldier, Elena recognized, a predator dressed in the skin of an ordinary man. "You have been busy, Specialist." Holt gestured at the files in front of him. "In the past 48 hours, you have single-handedly prevented the destruction of a critical supply route, saved the lives of an estimated 200 soldiers, and provided our intelligence analysts with the most detailed information we have ever obtained about Volkov's operational methods." "I was just doing my job, sir." "No." Holt's eyes met hers, sharp and appraising. "You were doing considerably more than your job. Your job was to evacuate with the rest of your unit. Instead, you disobeyed a direct order, engaged a superior enemy force, and placed yourself in extreme personal danger to protect assets that most soldiers would have written off as acceptable losses. Elena said nothing. There was nothing to say. The colonel was right. She had violated protocol, ignored orders, and done exactly what she had been told not to do. In a different army, under a different commander, she might have faced court-martial for her actions. But Holt did not look angry. He looked impressed. I have read your service record, Specialist. Fort Lee EOD school, top of your class. 3 combat deployments, 0 disciplinary incidents. Commendations from every commanding officer you have served under. And a family history that explains a great deal about why you are so good at what you do. My father was EOD, sir. I know. Holt nodded slowly. I served with Robert Reeves in Afghanistan back in 2009. He was one of the finest soldiers I ever met. When I heard about his death, He paused, something flickering in his eyes. I was sorry. He deserved better. Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the grief that never fully went away, no matter how many years passed. Thank you, sir. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened and his manner became more businesslike. Ordinarily, I would not involve an E4 in operational planning at this level. The decisions we make in this room affect thousands of lives. They require experience, judgment, perspective that usually takes decades to develop. But, Elena prompted, but you have something that no one else in this command possesses. Holt tapped the photograph of Volkov. You have seen his work up close. You have touched his devices, traced his circuits, understood his methods. Our intelligence analysts have been studying this man for years without making any significant progress. You learn more about him in 5 minutes than they have discovered in 5 years. Elena looked at the photograph again. The cold eyes stared back at her, revealing nothing. What exactly are you asking me to do, sir? Holt leaned back in his chair. I am assigning you to Task Force Sentinel. It is a joint special operations unit tasked with identifying and neutralizing high-value targets in this sector. As of now, Dmitri Volkov is at the top of their target list. And you, Specialist Reeves, are going to help them find him. The next several hours were a blur of briefings and intelligence reports and classified information that made Elena's head spin. She was escorted to a secure room deep within the TOC, a space she had not known existed, where the walls were lined with soundproofing material and the air was cold from the servers humming in the corner. Here, surrounded by analysts and intelligence officers who looked like they had not seen sunlight in weeks, she learned things about Volkov that the public would never know. Details so sensitive that even acknowledging their existence would be considered a security breach. The analysts spoke in the flat, clinical tones of people who dealt with horror as a matter of routine. They showed her photographs of bomb sites, bodies, devastation that Volkov had left in his wake over 2 decades of mayhem. They read her transcripts of intercepted communications, fragments of conversations that painted a picture of a man who viewed destruction as an art form and human life as raw material for his creations. Dmitri Volkov had been born in Leningrad in 1976, the son of a factory worker and a school teacher. He had grown up in the dying days of the Soviet Union, a time of bread lines and propaganda, and the creeping sense that everything the older generation had believed in was turning out to be a lie. He had shown exceptional aptitude for mathematics and engineering from an early age, the kind of prodigy that the Soviet system loved to identify and cultivate. By the time he was 16, he was already being groomed for important work. He earned admission to one of the Soviet Union's elite technical academies, an institution that officially did not exist and trained students in subjects that officially were not taught. By the time the USSR collapsed in '91, he was already a rising star in the Russian military, recruited into the Spetsnaz special forces, and trained in the deadly arts of sabotage and demolition. His instructors noted his unusual combination of technical brilliance and emotional detachment. He could design a device that would kill dozens of people and then sit down to eat lunch without a trace of discomfort. It was a valuable trait in his line of work. For nearly 2 decades, he had served his country with distinction. He had operated in Chechnya during both wars, leaving a trail of devastation that earned him commendations and promotions. He had worked in Georgia, in Ukraine, in countless other places where Russian interests required a particular kind of expertise. His superiors considered him one of the most talented explosive ordnance specialists they had ever produced. His colleagues called him the engineer, a reference to both his technical skills and his methodical approach to destruction. The analyst showed Elena photographs from that period, grainy surveillance images of a younger Volkov moving through urban environments with the confidence of a man who knew he was untouchable. He had been handsome once, in a severe kind of way, with sharp features and dark hair and the lean physique of a special operations soldier. The cold eyes were the same, though. Those had not changed at all. Then in 2010, something had happened. The intelligence reports were vague on the details, frustratingly incomplete. There had been an incident, they said, a mission that went wrong in ways that were never fully explained. Civilian casualties, a lot of them, including children. Someone in the chain of command decided to cover it up, to bury the truth beneath layers of classification and denial. Volkov had objected. He had demanded accountability. And for his trouble, he had been designated a traitor and marked for elimination. He had escaped, barely, fleeing Russia with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge in his head. There were rumors that he had killed 3 FSB agents during his escape, though nothing was ever proven. Within months, he had reinvented himself as a mercenary, selling his expertise to the highest bidder, regardless of ideology or nationality. The list of his known clients read like a who's who of global terrorism and organized crime. He had worked for Al-Qaeda and ISIS in a dozen splinter groups whose names changed faster than intelligence agencies could track them. He had provided services to drug cartels in South America and human trafficking networks in Eastern Europe and weapons dealers on 3 continents. His bombs had killed hundreds of people, perhaps thousands, and he had never been caught. Until now, until a young specialist at a forgotten checkpoint had looked into the darkness and seen him looking back. Elena studied the pattern of his recent operations, looking for the connections that others had missed. Over the past 3 months, there had been 7 attacks on infrastructure in the sector. A fuel depot destroyed, a communications relay station disabled, a section of pipeline ruptured, a bridge damaged but not destroyed. Each attack had followed the same pattern. A 5-minute warning before detonation, giving defenders just enough time to react, but not enough time to prevent the attack. Dual initiation systems that made the devices nearly impossible to disarm, and targets that all had one thing in common. They were all located along main supply route Tampa. Elena sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She was seeing something that the intelligence analysts had missed, a pattern within the pattern that changed everything. He is not trying to destroy the infrastructure, she said aloud. The analysts looked at her, their expressions skeptical. The evidence of destruction seems fairly conclusive, Specialist. No, you are not understanding. Elena stood and walked to the map on the wall, tracing the line of MSR Tampa with her finger. Look at the pattern. The fuel depot was hit, but the pipeline feeding it was left intact. The relay station was damaged, but the backup station 2 kilometers away was untouched. The bridge was targeted, but the alternate crossing 3 miles downstream was ignored. He is not trying to cut the supply line. He is testing it. Testing it for what? Elena turned to face them, testing our response times, testing our capabilities, testing our vulnerabilities. He wants to know how quickly we can react to a threat on MSR Tampa. He wants to know where our sensors are, how our communications work, what our standard operating procedures look like. He is mapping our entire defensive posture. The room was silent. The analysts exchanged glances, their skepticism slowly transforming into understanding. If that is true, one of them said slowly, then these attacks are not the main operation. They are preparation for something else, something bigger. Elena nodded. He is planning to move something through our sector, something important enough that he needs to know exactly how to avoid our defenses. And now, thanks to these tests, he knows. The breakthrough came 3 hours later. An NSA intercept, flagged as high priority, landed on their desks with the kind of urgency that made everyone stop what they were doing. The intercept was a communication between Volkov and an unknown party, encrypted using methods that had taken the NSA supercomputers several hours to crack. The message was brief but devastating. Package confirmed for delivery. Route cleared. Timeline 72 hours. The analysts worked through the night, piecing together fragments of intelligence from a dozen different sources. By dawn, they had assembled a picture that made Elena's blood run cold. Volkov had been hired to escort a shipment of biochemical agents through the sector. The agents were military grade, developed in laboratories that officially did not exist, capable of killing thousands of people if released in a populated area. The buyer was unknown, but the price was rumored to be in the tens of millions of dollars. The delivery route was MSR Tampa. Elena was summoned to Colonel Holt's office at Oak 100. The colonel looked like he had not slept. His uniform rumpled and his eyes shadowed with fatigue. But his voice was steady when he spoke. "You were right, Specialist. Volkov was testing us. And now we know why. He is moving biochemical weapons through our sector in the next 72 hours. If those weapons reach their destination, a lot of people are going to die." "What are our options, sir?" Holt spread his hands on the desk. "We could try to intercept the shipment, but we do not know exactly when or where it will cross into our area of operations. We could increase security along the entire route, but that would tip Volkov off and he would simply find another way through. Or we could try something different." "Different how?" Holt looked at her for a long moment. "You have proven yourself capable of thinking like Volkov. You understand his methods, his patterns, his way of approaching problems. I want you to use that understanding. I want you to predict his next move and be there waiting for him when he makes it." Elena felt the weight of the colonel's words settling on her shoulders. He was asking her to outthink one of the most dangerous bomb makers in the world. He was asking her to anticipate the moves of a man who had spent decades staying one step ahead of every intelligence agency on the planet. She thought about her father, about the lessons he had taught her in their garage in Kentucky, about the way he had looked at explosive devices, not as puzzles to be solved, but as conversations to be understood. "Every bomb tells a story," he used to say. "You just have to learn how to listen." "I will need access to everything we have on Volkov," she said. "Every report, every analysis, every piece of intelligence, no matter how insignificant it seems." "Done. And I will need a team. People I can trust. People who will follow my lead without question." Holt nodded. "Williams and Chen are already on the roster. They volunteered the moment they heard what was happening. I will assign you 4 additional operators, experienced soldiers who know this terrain and know how to fight." Elena stood. "When do we start?" "You already have, Specialist. The clock is ticking." The attack on Relay Station Kappa came on the 3rd night. Elena and her team had been positioned in a defensive perimeter since sunset, spread out across the rocky terrain that surrounded the communications facility. The station itself was a squat concrete building bristling with antenna arrays and satellite dishes, the nerve center that coordinated military traffic throughout the sector. Thousands of messages passed through its systems every hour, everything from routine logistics reports to classified operational orders. If Volkov was testing their defensive capabilities, this was a logical next target. She had positioned Preacher on the high ground to the north, giving him a clear field of fire across the main approach. Tommy was to the east with one of the new team members, covering the secondary access road. The other operators were spread around the perimeter in 2-man teams, each one responsible for a sector of the darkness that surrounded them. Elena herself had taken the position closest to the station, reasoning that if Volkov followed his established pattern, the bombs would be planted on the structure itself. She wanted to be close enough to respond immediately, close enough to have a chance at stopping the detonation before it could complete its deadly work. The night was cold, the temperature dropping rapidly once the sun disappeared below the horizon. Elena lay in a shallow depression behind a cluster of rocks, her rifle propped against the stone in front of her, her eyes straining against the darkness. The night vision optics painted the world in shades of green, transforming the familiar landscape into something alien and threatening. Hours passed, nothing moved. The only sounds were the distant hum of the generators and the occasional crackle of radio traffic from the station. Elena felt the cold seeping into her bones, the particular kind of chill that comes from lying motionless on the ground for too long. She wanted to move, to stretch, to do something other than wait. But waiting was part of the job. Sometimes the most important thing a soldier could do was nothing at all. Then at 0247, the first explosion lit up the darkness. The blast came from the south side of the station, a flash of orange fire followed by a shockwave that Elena felt in her chest even from 50 meters away. She was on her feet and moving before the sound had finished echoing across the rocks, her radio already at her lips. "Contact south, all teams report." The responses came in rapid succession. North clear, east clear, west clear. No one had seen anyone approach. No one had detected any movement. The attackers had somehow gotten past their entire defensive perimeter without triggering a single alarm. Elena reached the blast site in 30 seconds. A small outbuilding used for storage was fully engulfed in flames. But even as she assessed the damage, she realized something was wrong. The explosion had been too small, too contained. It had destroyed nothing of real value, just a shed full of spare parts and maintenance equipment. A decoy. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She spun, her eyes scanning the station for the real threat, and saw it immediately. Movement near the backup generator, dark shapes flowing across the concrete in a pattern she recognized from a dozen training scenarios. They were planting charges on the power supply, trying to take out the station's ability to function even if the primary systems survived. "Move," she shouted into her radio. "Primary charges are on the backup generator. West side of the compound. Now." Her team responded instantly, years of training overriding fear and confusion. They converged on the generator from multiple directions, laying down suppressive fire that forced the attackers to break off their work and seek cover. Elena sprinted across the open ground, her lungs burning, her legs pumping, closing the distance between herself and the bombs. The attackers melted away into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared, professional soldiers who knew better than to stand and fight when the odds turned against them. Within seconds, the firefight was over, leaving only silence and the crackle of flames from the burning storage shed. There were 4 charges in total, attached to the generator housing with magnetic clamps. Elena disarmed the first 2 in less than 30 seconds each, her fingers flying over the familiar circuits with a confidence born of desperation. The design was similar to what she had seen at the bridge, the same dual initiation system, the same anti-tamper features. Volkov's signature, unmistakable and deadly. The third charge was more complex, a variation on a standard design that included a motion sensor she had not seen before. The sensor was connected to the collapsing circuit, designed to trigger the charge if anyone tried to move or remove the device. It was clever, Elena had to admit, clever and vicious, like everything Volkov did. She disabled it with seconds to spare, using a technique her father had taught her years ago, a way of fooling the sensor into thinking the device was still stationary while she worked on the internals. Sweat dripped down her face, stinging her eyes, but she did not stop to wipe it away. There was no time. There was never enough time. The fourth charge exploded before she could reach it. The blast threw her backward, slamming her into a concrete wall with force that drove the air from her lungs. For a moment, everything went white, a blank void where sight and sound ceased to exist. Then the world came back in fragments, sound and fury, fire and smoke. The screams of wounded soldiers and the bark of automatic weapons as her team engaged targets she could not see. Elena pulled herself upright, ignoring the pain that lanced through her back and shoulders. Her ears were ringing, her vision was blurred, but she forced herself to focus, to push through the disorientation and assess the situation. Preacher was down, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, his eyes unfocused but alive. He was trying to sit up, trying to get back in the fight, but his body was not cooperating. Tommy was clutching his left arm, his face twisted in agony, the bone clearly broken beneath the skin. 2 of the other team members were already treating them, applying pressure bandages and calling for medevac with the calm professionalism of soldiers who had done this many times before. The relay station was damaged but not destroyed. The backup power supply was gone, a smoking crater where the generator had stood. But the primary systems were still functioning. The antenna arrays still pointing at the sky, the satellite dishes still tracking their targets. They had saved most of it. But that was not the victory Elena had hoped for. Because as she looked at the destruction around her, at her wounded teammates and the burning wreckage, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Volkov had wanted them to save most of it. That was the whole point. He was not trying to destroy the relay station. He was testing them again, measuring their response time, evaluating their capabilities, learning how they fought so he could figure out how to beat them. And now, because of her, 3 of her people were hurt. 3 soldiers who had trusted her to lead them, who had followed her into danger because they believed she knew what she was doing. She had failed them. She had played right into Volkov's hands, and they had paid the price for her mistakes. Elena found the USB drive in the wreckage 3 hours later. It was sitting on a piece of rubble that had no business being where it was, positioned exactly where she would see it, exactly where Volkov knew she would look. a message left specifically for her. She plugged the drive into a secure terminal and watched the video that appeared on the screen. Volkov was sitting in a bare room, his face lit by a single lamp. His expression was calm, almost friendly, like a teacher addressing a favorite student. Specialist Reeves? His voice was smooth, cultured, with just a trace of Russian accent. You are looking for me. Good. I would be disappointed if you were not, but I think you are asking the wrong questions. Elena leaned closer to the screen. The question is not where I am. The question is what I am moving. Volkov smiled, and the expression never reached his eyes. You have 72 hours to figure it out. After that, a great many people are going to die, and there will be nothing you can do to stop it. He paused, and his smile widened slightly. Bring the people you care about with you when you come. I do enjoy having an audience. The screen went dark. Elena stared at the blank display for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. Sarge, it is Ace. I need to see you. She found Dalton sitting up in his hospital bed, looking stronger than he had the last time she visited. The color had returned to his face, and his eyes were sharp and alert, despite the medication that must have been flowing through his system. I heard about Kappa, he said as she entered. You did good. Not good enough. Elena pulled up a chair and sat down. 4 of my people got hurt, and Volkov is still out there playing games with us. Tell me. She told him everything. The intelligence reports, the NSA intercept, the biochemical weapons, the 72-hour timeline. Volkov's message. When she finished, Dalton was quiet for a long time. This is not about the bridge anymore, he said finally. This is not even about your father. This is something bigger. Something that goes beyond anything we have dealt with before. I know, and you are still going to go after him. Elena met his eyes, would you? Dalton's answer was slow in coming. For a moment, he was not a wounded soldier in a hospital bed. He was a young man again, full of fire and purpose, ready to throw himself into danger for a cause he believed in. I would do what I was trained to do, he said. I would do my duty, no matter the cost. Elena nodded. Then you have your answer, Sarge. She stood to leave, but Dalton's voice stopped her. Ace, wait. She turned back. He was reaching for something on the table beside his bed, a small object that glinted in the fluorescent light. When he held it out to her, she saw that it was a poker chip, worn smooth by years of handling. I have carried this since my first deployment, he said, 30 years ago. It reminds me of why I do what I do, not for glory, not for medals, for the people beside me, for the brothers and sisters who trust me to watch their backs. Elena took the chip. It was warm from his hand, weighted with decades of meaning. Come back, Ace, that is an order. She closed her fingers around the chip. I will do my best, Sarge. I know you will. The sun was setting over the forward operating base when Elena walked back to the Tactical Operations Center. The sky was painted in shades of orange and red, beautiful in a way that seemed almost obscene against the backdrop of war and death that had surrounded them. She thought about her father as she walked, about the lessons he had taught her, about the legacy he had left behind. He had died trying to stop men like Volkov, trying to protect people who would never know his name. Now she was carrying on that work, picking up the torch that had fallen from his hands. 5 minutes, he had told her. 5 minutes is a lifetime if you know how to use it. She had 72 hours, 4,320 minutes. An eternity if she was smart enough to use it properly. Elena entered the TOC and found Colonel Holt waiting for her with the rest of Task Force Sentinel. Maps were spread across the table. Satellite photographs covered the walls. The air hummed with tension and purpose. We have analyzed Volkov's probable route, Holt said as she approached. Based on the intelligence we have gathered and your analysis of his patterns, we believe we know where he will try to cross into our sector. You will lead the reconnaissance element. Find him, track him, and when the time is right, we will take him down. Elena looked at the faces around the table. Preacher, his head bandaged but his eyes clear. Tommy, his arm in a sling but his jaw set with determination. The other operators, men she was only beginning to know, but who had already proven themselves willing to fight and die beside her. She thought about Dalton's poker chip, resting in her pocket. She thought about her father's face, smiling at her from the photographs in her memory. She thought about Volkov, waiting somewhere in the darkness, preparing his next move. Then she took a deep breath and spoke the words that would set everything in motion. Let us go hunting. The convoy rolled out at midnight. Elena sat in the lead vehicle, watching the desert scroll past in shades of gray and green through her night vision optics. Somewhere ahead of them, Volkov was moving his deadly cargo toward its destination. Somewhere ahead of them, thousands of lives hung in the balance. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. Her father smiled up at her from the image, his arm around her shoulders, both of them squinting against the Kentucky sun. "This time I will have more than 5 minutes," she whispered to him. "This time I will finish what you started." The convoy drove on into the darkness, carrying her toward whatever waited ahead. And Elena Reeves, daughter of a legend, student of a ghost, hunter of a devil, prepared herself for the fight of her life. The hunt had begun. The convoy moved through the desert like a snake hunting in darkness. 4 armored vehicles spread out in tactical formation, their headlights extinguished, their engines muffled by the special baffles that special operations units used when silence meant the difference between success and catastrophe. Elena sat in the lead vehicle, her eyes fixed on the terrain ahead, watching the landscape scroll past through her night vision optics. The green-tinted world looked alien and hostile, every shadow a potential threat, every rock formation a possible hiding place for the enemies she knew were waiting somewhere ahead. They were 40 kilometers from FOB Sentinel, deep in territory that belonged to no one and everyone at the same time. The sand stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by occasional rock formations that rose from the earth like the bones of ancient giants. There was no moon tonight. The stars provided the only illumination, cold and distant and utterly indifferent to the drama unfolding beneath them. Elena had grown used to that indifference over the past months. The universe did not care about her mission or her revenge or the thousands of lives that hung in the balance. It simply existed, vast and uncaring, while human beings struggled and fought and died in the dust at its feet. Task Force Sentinel had deployed at midnight, 20 operators in 4 vehicles, supported by a pair of Apache attack helicopters that were holding station 15 kilometers to the east, ready to provide fire support at a moment's notice. The helicopters were their insurance policy, their guarantee that no matter what happened on the ground, they would have overwhelming firepower available to bail them out. Colonel Holt had insisted on the air support despite the risk of detection. "Better to have it and not need it," he had said, "than to need it and not have it." The colonel's voice was a constant presence in Elena's earpiece, calm and measured despite the stakes of the operation. He had been monitoring their progress since they left the wire, tracking their movement on the satellite feed, coordinating with the helicopter crews and the quick reaction force that was standing by at the base in case everything went wrong. His professionalism was reassuring. Whatever happened tonight, they would not be abandoned. The intelligence had been specific. Volkov's convoy would be crossing through their sector sometime in the next 6 hours, moving along a route that paralleled MSR Tampa before cutting north toward the border. 5 trucks disguised as humanitarian aid vehicles, carrying enough biochemical agents to kill tens of thousands of people. The buyer was still unknown, but the destination was suspected to be a population center somewhere in the region, a city of millions that had no idea what was heading toward them. Elena had spent the previous 2 days preparing for this moment. She had studied satellite photographs until her eyes burned, memorizing every feature of the terrain. She had reviewed intelligence reports until the words blurred together on the page. She had run through scenarios with her team until they could execute the intercept plan in their sleep. She had done everything in her power to prepare for success. But deep in her gut, she knew that preparation was not enough. Volkov had been doing this for decades. He had evaded capture by the best intelligence agencies in the world. He had survived assassination attempts by professional killers. He was not going to be easy to catch, no matter how well they planned. The vehicle hit a bump in the road, jolting Elena from her thoughts. She glanced at the soldiers around her, taking measure of their readiness. Preacher sat to her left, his saw resting across his knees, his lips moving silently in what she knew was a prayer. The bandage on his head was a stark white in the darkness, a reminder of what had happened at Relay Station Kappa. He should have been resting, recovering from his concussion. Instead, he was here, risking his life again because he refused to let her face this alone. Tommy Chen sat in the back, wedged between 2 operators whose names Elena barely knew. His broken arm was still in a sling, the bone not yet healed from the injury at the relay station. But his good hand gripped his rifle with fierce determination, and his eyes were clear and focused. He had volunteered for this mission without hesitation, knowing the risks, accepting them without complaint. Elena had tried to leave both of them behind. She had argued, cajoled, even pulled rank in an attempt to keep them safe at the base. But they had refused to stay. "We started this together," Preacher had said, his voice quiet but firm. "We finish it together. That is how it works." She had not argued further. She understood loyalty. She understood the bonds that formed between soldiers who had bled together. And she understood that trying to stop them would have been pointless anyway. They were here because they chose to be, because they believed in the mission and in her. And nothing she said would change that. The radio crackled in her ear, breaking the silence. "Sentinel Lead, this is Overwatch. We have visual on the target convoy. 5 vehicles heading north on Route 7, approximately 12 kilometers from your position." Elena keyed her mic. "Roger, Overwatch. What is their formation?" "Single file, moving at approximately 40 kilometers per hour. No escort vehicles visible. No outriders. They look like exactly what they are pretending to be." Elena frowned. That was wrong. Volkov was many things, but careless was not one of them. A convoy carrying cargo this valuable should have been surrounded by security. Layers of protection designed to deter any attempt at interception. Instead, the trucks were rolling through the desert alone, undefended, almost inviting attack. It was too easy. Way too easy. "Something is not right," she said. Colonel Holt's voice came over the command frequency. "I agree. This is too easy. Proceed with caution, Sentinel Lead, and be ready for anything." The convoy continued forward, closing the distance to the intercept point. Elena could feel the tension in the vehicle around her, the heightened awareness of soldiers who knew they were heading into danger. Preacher sat beside her, his saw resting across his lap, his bandaged head a reminder of what had happened at Relay Station Kappa. Tommy was in the back with 2 other operators, his broken arm still in a sling, but his good hand gripping his rifle with fierce determination. She had tried to leave both of them behind. Preacher had barely recovered from his concussion, and Tommy was operating at half capacity with his injury, but they had refused to stay at base, refused to let her walk into danger without them. "We started this together," Preacher had said. "We finish it together. That is how it works." Elena had not argued. She understood loyalty. She understood the bonds that formed between soldiers who had bled together. And she understood that trying to stop them would have been pointless anyway. 5 kilometers, the driver announced. ETA 3 minutes. Elena checked her weapon one last time, ensuring the magazine was seated, the safety was off, the round was chambered. The ritual calmed her nerves, gave her something to focus on besides the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Beside her, Preacher was doing the same thing, his lips moving silently in what she knew was a prayer. The convoy rounded a bend in the road, and there they were. 5 trucks, parked in a row along the side of the route, their engines idling, their headlights dark. They looked exactly like what they claimed to be. Humanitarian aid vehicles bearing the logos of international relief organizations. White paint, blue lettering. The universal symbols of compassion and assistance. But Elena knew better. She knew that beneath those innocent markings, those trucks carried death on an unimaginable scale. "All units, halt!" Elena held up her fist, signaling the convoy to stop. "Something is wrong here." The vehicles rolled to a stop 200 meters from the parked trucks. Elena studied the scene through her optics, looking for any sign of movement, any indication of what was waiting for them. The trucks sat motionless, their doors closed, their cargo areas covered with heavy tarps. "Where are the drivers?" Preacher asked. "Good question." Elena scanned the surrounding terrain. Nothing moved. The desert was as silent and still as a graveyard. Even the wind had died, leaving the air heavy and oppressive. "Sentinel Lead, this is Overwatch. We are not detecting any heat signatures around those vehicles. They appear to be abandoned." Abandoned. Elena's instincts screamed at her that this was wrong, that they were walking into something they did not understand. Volkov did not abandon vehicles. Volkov did not leave valuable cargo sitting unguarded in the middle of the desert. Unless, it is a trap. The words had barely left her mouth when the first explosion ripped through the night. The IED detonated directly beneath the 3rd vehicle in their convoy, a massive blast that lifted the armored Humvee off the ground and flipped it onto its side like a child's toy. Elena watched in horror as the vehicle tumbled through the air, spinning end over end, spilling soldiers and equipment in every direction. The sound was enormous, a physical force that slammed into her chest and rattled her teeth. The shockwave hit Elena's vehicle a split second later, filling her ears with a high-pitched ringing that drowned out everything else. The driver fought to maintain control as the blast wave buffeted them, the steering wheel jerking in his hands, the tires losing traction on the loose sand. Contact. Someone was screaming into the radio. Contact left. Contact right. They are everywhere. More explosions followed, a chain of detonations that marched along the road behind them, cutting off their retreat and trapping them in a kill zone that Volkov had prepared days or weeks in advance. Elena saw the fourth vehicle take a direct hit, its fuel tank igniting in a fireball that illuminated the night like a second sun. The heat of the explosion washed over her face even from 50 meters away. Soldiers were spilling out of the surviving vehicles, seeking cover, returning fire at enemies they could not see. Muzzle flashes flickered in the darkness, marking positions on both sides of the road. The enemy had them in a crossfire, a classic L-shaped ambush that they had walked into like amateurs. Elena's mind raced, processing the tactical situation even as the chaos unfolded around her. The IEDs had been buried in the road surface, hidden beneath the sand, impossible to detect from their vehicles. The enemy fighters had been waiting in prepared positions, patient and disciplined, holding their fire until the explosions created maximum confusion. This was not an improvised attack. This was a meticulously planned operation executed with military precision. Volkov. This had Volkov written all over it. All units, fall back to the rally point. Holt's voice crackled in her ear, barely audible over the chaos. I repeat, fall back. The radio dissolved into static. Someone was jamming their communications, blocking the frequencies they used to coordinate their movements. Elena tried switching to the backup channel, then the emergency channel, then every other frequency she could think of. Nothing but white noise. They were cut off, isolated, fighting blind. The Apache helicopters, she thought desperately. They should be able to see what was happening, should be moving to support them. But without communications, they had no way to call for help, no way to coordinate the air support that might save their lives. This way. Elena grabbed Preacher's arm and pointed toward a cluster of rocks 50 meters to their left. We need cover. They ran, bullets kicking up sand around their feet, the night alive with muzzle flashes and the crack of automatic weapons. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar of gunfire punctuated by the occasional explosion of a grenade or the scream of a wounded soldier. Elena ran harder than she had ever run in her life, her legs pumping, her lungs burning, every instinct screaming at her to get out of the open, to find shelter before a bullet found her. Tommy was with them, running awkwardly with his injured arm, his face twisted with pain and determination. He stumbled on the uneven ground and nearly fell, but Preacher caught him, hauled him upright, kept him moving. Two other operators followed, soldiers whose names Elena barely knew, but who had become her brothers in the space of a heartbeat. They reached the rocks and threw themselves behind them, pressing their bodies against the cold stone as rounds snapped overhead. The bullets hit the rocks with sharp cracking sounds, sending chips of stone flying through the air like tiny knives. Elena felt something sting her cheek, blood trickling down her face from a cut she did not remember receiving. She risked a glance over the top of her cover and saw the main force pinned down 200 meters away, engaged in a fierce firefight with enemies who had appeared from nowhere. Bodies lay in the sand, American bodies, soldiers who would never go home, who would never see their families again. The sight filled her with a cold rage that burned away her fear. The convoy. Preacher was shouting to be heard over the noise. We have to get to the convoy. Elena looked at the 5 trucks sitting untouched in the middle of the chaos. Whatever Volkov was moving, whatever deadly cargo those vehicles contained, it was still there, still waiting, still capable of killing thousands of people if it reached its destination. The enemy fighters were not trying to protect the trucks. They were trying to protect Volkov's escape route, keeping the Americans pinned down while the real prize slipped away. She made her decision. Williams, Chen, you are with me. We are going for the trucks. The rest of you provide covering fire. The 2 operators she had designated nodded. One of them was a sergeant named Reyes, a 10-year veteran who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. The other was a corporal named Davis, younger but no less determined. They had volunteered for this mission knowing the risks. They were ready to die if necessary. Elena prayed it would not come to that. On my mark, 3, 2, 1, move. They broke from cover and sprinted toward the trucks, zigzagging across the open ground to make themselves harder targets. Behind them, the remaining operators opened up with everything they had, pouring fire into the positions where the enemy had taken shelter. The suppressive fire bought them precious seconds, precious meters, bringing them closer to the objective with every step. Elena reached the first truck and pressed herself against its side, her rifle raised, her breathing ragged. Preacher and Tommy arrived a moment later, their faces streaked with sweat and dust. The other two operators took up positions on the far side of the vehicle, covering the approaches. "We clear them one at a time," Elena said. "Watch for booby traps. Volkov loves booby traps." She moved to the back of the truck and pulled open the canvas flap that covered the cargo area. Inside, she found nothing. Empty. Just bare metal flooring and the lingering smell of diesel fuel. The second truck was the same. Empty. A decoy designed to waste their time and resources. The third truck was different. Elena pulled back the canvas and felt her blood run cold. Metal canisters lined the walls of the cargo area, dozens of them, each one bearing the distinctive trefoil symbol of a biohazard warning. They were cylindrical, about the size of fire extinguishers, made of brushed steel with heavy-duty valves at the top. A low humming sound emanated from somewhere within the cargo bed, the sound of refrigeration units working to keep the contents at the proper temperature. "This is it," she breathed. "This is the payload." Preacher climbed into the truck and examined one of the canisters. "How many?" Elena did a quick count. 47, each one containing enough biochemical agent to contaminate a small city's water supply or poison the air of a crowded stadium. Together, they represented more killing power than a nuclear weapon, a plague in a bottle that could spread across an entire region if released. "We need to secure this vehicle," she said. "Nothing else matters. This truck does not leave our sight." A burst of gunfire erupted from somewhere nearby, followed by a scream that was cut short almost immediately. Elena spun toward the sound, her rifle coming up, her eyes searching for the threat. The fourth truck. Someone was inside the fourth truck. "Stay here." Elena jumped down from the cargo bed and moved toward the fourth vehicle, her weapon raised, her senses on high alert. The canvas covering the back of the truck was moving, bulging outward as if something inside was trying to get out. She reached the truck and grabbed the canvas, yanking it aside with one swift motion. A body tumbled out, landing at her feet in a heap of blood and torn clothing. One of the enemy fighters shot multiple times, his weapon still clutched in his dead hands. Behind him, in the darkness of the cargo bed, more bodies were visible. A firefight had taken place here recently, though Elena could not imagine who had been doing the fighting. Then she heard the voice. "Specialist Reeves." Elena froze. The voice had come from the fifth truck, calm and unhurried, cutting through the chaos of battle with an almost supernatural clarity. She knew that voice. She had heard it twice before, once at the bridge and once in the video message. It was a voice that haunted her dreams. "Volkov, I have been waiting for you." The voice continued, conversational, almost friendly. "Please, come and say hello. We have much to discuss." Elena looked back at Preacher and Tommy. They had heard the voice too. Preacher shook his head, his expression grim. "Do not do it," his eyes said. "It is a trap." Of course it was a trap. Everything about this night was a trap. But Elena had not come this far to turn back now. She had spent 8 years searching for the man who killed her father. And now he was waiting for her, 20 meters away, close enough to touch. "Cover me," she said, "and if I am not out in 5 minutes?" "We come in after you," Preacher finished. "I know." Elena took a deep breath and walked toward the fifth truck. Her footsteps seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over the battlefield. Even the gunfire had stopped, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. She reached the truck and pulled back the canvas. Dmitri Volkov sat on a metal bench inside the cargo area, his hands resting on his knees, his posture relaxed. He looked exactly like his photograph, the same angular features, the same cold eyes, the same thin mouth that seemed incapable of genuine emotion. He was wearing civilian clothes, a dark jacket over a gray shirt, and he appeared to be completely unarmed. "Specialist Reeves." He smiled, and the expression never reached his eyes. "At last we meet face to face. I must say you are even more impressive in person than I expected." Elena kept her rifle trained on his chest, hands where I can see them. "Do not move." Volkov spread his hands in a gesture of surrender, but there was nothing surrendering about his demeanor. He looked like a man who was exactly where he wanted to be, doing exactly what he had planned to do. Before you shoot me, he said calmly, there is something you should know. Something about your father. Elena's finger tightened on the trigger. She did not want to hear it, did not want to engage with this monster on any level, but she could not stop herself from responding. What about him? Robert Reeves did not die because of a random IED. He died because of me. I designed the device that killed him. I placed it in his path. I watched him work on it, trying to defeat my creation, and I detonated it when he was 2 minutes away from success. Elena felt the world tilt around her. She had suspected, of course. She had known from the moment Volkov first spoke to her at the bridge that he was connected to her father's death. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing him admit to murder with such casual indifference, was something else entirely. I know, she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. I figured it out. Volkov's eyebrows rose slightly. You knew? I was not certain, but you just confirmed it. A genuine smile crossed Volkov's face, brief and unsettling. Clever, like your father. He was the smartest opponent I ever faced. Until you came along. Why? Elena heard herself asking. Why did you kill him? Volkov leaned back against the wall of the truck, his expression thoughtful. Because he was getting too close. 8 years ago, I was running an operation similar to this one, moving sensitive materials through this region, using routes that your military believed were secure. Your father noticed the pattern. He started tracking my movements, analyzing my methods, building a case that would have exposed our entire network. He was doing his job, Elena said. Yes, and he was doing it too well. So I removed him from the equation. It was nothing personal, Specialist, just business. Elena's grip on her rifle tightened. Nothing personal. He had murdered her father, destroyed her family, and left her orphaned and alone, and he called it nothing personal. And now her voice was cold. What is this? More business? Volkov's smile widened. Now it is personal. You see, your father wounded me before he died. Not physically, professionally. The case he was building, the evidence he had gathered, it forced us to shut down operations for nearly 2 years. Cost us millions of dollars and countless opportunities. I have never forgiven him for that. He rose from the bench, moving slowly, his hands still visible. Elena tracked him with her rifle, ready to fire at the first sign of aggression. When I learned that his daughter had joined the army, Volkov continued, I was curious. When I learned she had become an EOD technician, I was intrigued. And when I learned she had been assigned to this sector, to this specific checkpoint on this specific route, I knew it was fate. You set this all up. Elena understood now. The test at the bridge, the attack on the relay station. All of it was designed to bring me here. Volkov nodded. I wanted to see what you were capable of, whether you had inherited your father's gifts. And you exceeded my expectations, Specialist. You defeated my devices. You predicted my patterns. You tracked me here against all odds. So what now? Now, Volkov's expression hardened. Now I finish what I started 8 years ago. Your father had 5 minutes to save himself and failed. Let us see how you do. He moved faster than Elena would have thought possible for a man his age. One moment he was standing by the wall, his hands raised in apparent surrender. The next he was inside her guard, his arms sweeping her rifle aside, his body slamming into hers with the practiced efficiency of a trained killer. Elena fought back with everything she had, but she was outmatched from the start. Volkov was Spetsnaz, trained in close-quarters combat by some of the most brutal instructors in the world. He had been doing this for decades, honing his skills in conflicts that most people never knew existed. She was good, he was better. They struggled in the confined space of the truck, Elena desperately trying to create distance, Volkov relentlessly closing it. He caught her arm and twisted, sending a shock of pain through her shoulder. She broke free and swung at his face, but he blocked the blow and countered with a strike that caught her in the ribs. The fight was brutal and ugly, nothing like the choreographed battles in movies. They crashed against the walls of the truck, stumbled over equipment, grappled in the darkness like animals. Elena tasted blood in her mouth. Her vision blurred, her muscles burned with exhaustion. But she was not trying to win. She was trying to survive long enough for Preacher and Tommy to secure the cargo. Every second she kept Volkov occupied was a second they could use to ensure the biochemical agents did not fall into the wrong hands. Volkov seemed to sense her strategy. His attacks became more vicious, more desperate. He wanted to end this quickly, to finish her and escape before the situation slipped further out of his control. He caught her with a kick to the knee that buckled her leg. She went down, crashing to the floor of the truck, her breath exploding from her lungs. Before she could recover, Volkov was on top of her, his knee pressing into her chest, his hand closing around her throat. 5 minutes, he said, his face inches from hers. That is all your father had. And you? You have even less. His grip tightened. Elena felt the blood pounding in her temples, felt the darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. She clawed at his arm, trying to break his hold, but her strength was failing. She could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the life being squeezed out of her one heartbeat at a time. Then she heard the gunshot. The bullet caught Volkov in the shoulder. Up on shoulder, spinning him off of her and slamming him against the wall of the truck. Blood sprayed across Elena's face as she gasped for air, her lungs burning, her vision slowly clearing. The back of the truck was suddenly flooded with light. A figure stood silhouetted in the opening, a pistol raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Nobody touches my people. Elena's heart lurched. She knew that voice, but it could not be. It was impossible. Master Sergeant Frank Dalton stood at the entrance to the truck, his left arm still in a sling, his hospital gown replaced by tactical gear that hung loose on his diminished frame. His face was pale and drawn, but his eyes were clear and his hand was steady. Sarge? Elena pushed herself up on her elbows, staring at him in disbelief. What are you doing here? Dalton did not lower his weapon. His eyes remained fixed on Volkov, who was slumped against the wall, clutching his wounded shoulder. You think I was going to let you do this alone? Dalton's voice was rough, strained with pain and determination. I have been doing this for 30 years, Ace. I know when to follow orders, and I know when to break them. And right now, breaking them is the right call. Elena pulled herself to her feet, her body screaming in protest. Volkov was still moving, still conscious, his cold eyes fixed on Dalton with an expression that mixed pain with something like respect. The old soldier, Volkov said through gritted teeth. I should have known. You should have, Dalton agreed, but you were too focused on her to see the bigger picture. For a moment, no one moved. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension and the smell of blood. Then Volkov smiled. He rolled sideways, faster than Elena would have thought possible for a wounded man, and something small and cylindrical flew from his hand. Elena recognized it immediately. A smoke grenade. The truck filled with thick white smoke, blinding them, choking them. Elena lunged toward where Volkov had been, but her hands closed on empty air. She heard movement, a grunt of pain, the sound of canvas tearing. When the smoke finally cleared, driven away by the night breeze, Volkov was gone. A trail of blood led from the truck into the darkness. Drops of crimson splattered across the sand like a trail of breadcrumbs. Elena moved to follow it, but Dalton's hand closed on her arm. No, he is getting away. Let him go. Dalton's eyes met hers, firm and unyielding. The cargo is what matters. We secure the cargo first. Volkov can wait. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to tear herself free and chase the man who had killed her father into the desert and finish what had been started 8 years ago. But she knew Dalton was right. The biochemical agents in the third truck could kill thousands of people if they were not secured. Personal vengeance had to wait. She turned away from the blood trail, away from the darkness that had swallowed Volkov, and walked back toward the third truck where Preacher and Tommy were waiting. You okay, boss? Preacher's voice was tight with concern. We heard the fight. We're about to come in when we saw Sarge arrive. I am fine. Elena's throat ached where Volkov had choked her, and her ribs throbbed with every breath. But she was alive. That was enough. We need to secure this vehicle, she said. Get the engine started. We are driving it back to base. Preacher nodded and moved to comply. Tommy covered him, his good arm steady despite everything he had been through. The other operators were converging on their position, the main force having finally broken through the enemy ambush. Elena stood beside Dalton, watching the blood trail disappear into the darkness. There will be another day, the old sergeant said quietly. We will find him. I know, Elena replied, and when we do, I will be ready. She turned to help Preacher with the truck, pushing thoughts of Volkov aside, focusing on the task at hand. That was when the alarm started. It came from inside the cargo bed, a high-pitched electronic wail that cut through the night like a knife. Elena's blood ran cold. She knew that sound. She had heard it twice before, at the bridge and at the relay station. It was the sound of a countdown beginning, the sound of death announcing its imminent arrival. A countdown. She threw herself into the truck and saw what Volkov had done. One of the canisters, the largest one in the center of the cargo bed, had been fitted with a device she had not noticed before. A timer wired directly to the canister's release valve, connected to a small explosive charge that would rupture the container and release its contents into the atmosphere. The display showed red numbers counting down, each digit a hammer blow against her heart. 0500, 0459, 0458. Volkov had activated it remotely. Even wounded, even fleeing for his life, he had found a way to strike back at them one final time. He must have had a dead man switch, a trigger that would activate if he did not check in at regular intervals, or perhaps he had simply pressed a button on a concealed transmitter as he disappeared into the darkness. Either way, the result was the same. They had 5 minutes before the canister ruptured, 5 minutes before a cloud of biochemical death spread across the desert, carried by the wind toward the populated areas to the east. 5 minutes before everyone within kilometers became a victim of Volkov's final revenge. "Everyone out!" Elena shouted. "Clear the area, now!" "What is happening?" Dalton appeared at the entrance to the truck, his face pale in the glow of the emergency lights. He was leaning heavily against the frame, his wound bleeding through the bandages that wrapped his midsection. He should not have been standing, he should not have been conscious. But the old sergeant was still on his feet, still fighting, still refusing to give up. Elena looked at him, her face pale in the reflected glow of the timer display. The red numbers cast harsh shadows across her features, making her look older than her 26 years, making her look like someone who had seen too much and fought too hard and had nothing left to give. He armed one of the canisters. "If that valve opens, everyone within 5 kilometers is dead. Maybe more, depending on wind conditions. We are looking at mass casualties, Sarge, civilian and military alike. Can you stop it?" Elena stared at the device, her mind racing through possibilities, solutions, ways out of this impossible situation. The timer was integrated with the release valve, which meant she could not simply cut the wires and walk away. If she interrupted the circuit incorrectly, the explosive charge would detonate immediately, releasing the contents of the canister in a concentrated burst. If she did nothing, the countdown would reach 0 and the same thing would happen. She needed to find a way to disable the trigger without activating the failsafe. She needed to identify the circuit, trace the wiring, understand the logic of Volkov's design. She needed to do everything her father had taught her to do, and she needed to do it in less than 5 minutes. "I do not know," she said honestly, "but I have 5 minutes to figure it out." She climbed into the truck and knelt beside the canister as the countdown continued, each second bringing them closer to catastrophe. Behind her, she heard Dalton ordering the others to fall back, establishing a perimeter, calling for whatever support might still be able to reach them through the jammed communications. His voice was strained with pain and exhaustion, but his commands were clear and precise. Even now, even bleeding and broken, he was still the leader they needed him to be. 5 minutes. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, as clear as if he were standing beside her. 5 minutes is a lifetime if you know how to use it. Every second counts, Ace. Every heartbeat matters. Stay calm, stay focused. Trust your training. Elena took a deep breath, steadied her hands, and went to work. The clock was ticking. 4:32, 4:30. She pulled out her multi-tool and began examining the wiring, tracing each connection from the timer to the detonator to the release valve. The design was elegant in its simplicity, a testament to Volkov's expertise. There were no unnecessary components, no redundant systems, just the bare minimum required to accomplish the task. Every wire served a purpose. Every connection was essential. But that simplicity was also a weakness. Without redundancy, there was no backup system to trigger if she disabled the primary. If she could find the right point to interrupt the circuit, she could stop the countdown without activating the failsafe. 4:15, 04:14, 4:13. The sweat was dripping into her eyes now, blurring her vision. She blinked it away and kept working, her fingers moving with a precision that came from years of practice. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud in her ears, counting down the seconds alongside the digital display. And somewhere in the darkness, Dmitri Volkov was watching, waiting, smiling. The game was not over yet, but neither was Elena Reeves. 400, 0359, 0358. The countdown continued, and Elena worked on. racing against time itself in a battle that would determine whether she lived or died, whether thousands of innocent people lived or died, whether everything she had fought for meant anything at all. Her father had failed this test. He had run out of time, run out of options, run out of hope. Elena refused to make the same mistake. She would find a way. She had to find a way. Because 5 minutes was all she had, and she was going to use every single second. The red numbers glowed in the darkness like the eyes of some ancient demon, counting down the seconds until catastrophe. Elena knelt beside the canister, her hands moving over the surface of the device, her mind racing through everything she had ever learned about explosives and detonators, and the cruel logic of men who built machines designed to kill. The air inside the truck bed was thick with the smell of metal and chemicals, a scent that would have alarmed most people, but which Elena recognized as the signature of Volkov's work. 347, 346, 345. The timer was integrated with a small explosive charge, about the size of a cigarette pack, positioned directly against the release valve of the biochemical canister. The charge was military-grade Semtex, she recognized, a plastic explosive favored by special operations forces around the world for its stability and reliability. When the countdown reached 0, the charge would detonate, rupturing the valve and releasing the contents into the atmosphere. The wind was blowing from the west tonight, she had noticed earlier, a steady breeze of about 10 kilometers per hour. That wind would carry the agent east, toward the populated areas, toward the cities and towns where people were sleeping peacefully, unaware of the death that was racing toward them. Elena forced herself to focus. She could not think about the people who would die if she failed. She could not think about the families and children and grandparents who would wake to find their world transformed into a nightmare of sickness and death. She could not think about the magnitude of the disaster she was trying to prevent. She could only think about the device in front of her, the wires and circuits and connections that held the key to stopping it. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, calm and steady, the voice of a man who had faced situations like this hundreds of times throughout his career. Start with what you know, Ace. Every device has a logic. Every bomb tells a story. Find the logic, read the story, and the solution will reveal itself. He had said those words to her in their garage in Kentucky, years ago, when she was just a teenager learning the basics of explosive ordnance disposal. She had not fully understood them then. She understood them now. She examined the wiring more closely, tracing each connection from the timer to the detonator with her penlight and her fingertips. The design was Volkov's signature work, elegant and efficient, with no wasted components and no unnecessary complexity. Every wire served a purpose. Every connection was essential. It was almost beautiful in a terrible way, like the work of a master craftsman who happened to specialize in death. There were 3 primary wires running from the timer to the explosive charge: a red wire, a blue wire, and a yellow wire. Classic configuration, the kind that bomb disposal technicians were trained to recognize and defeat in their first weeks of school. Cut the blue wire, the instructors would say, and the device is neutralized. It was a joke, of course, a reference to the countless movies where heroes defused bombs by guessing which wire to cut. In reality, no 2 devices were exactly alike, and the color of a wire meant nothing without understanding the circuit it was part of. But Elena knew better than to trust appearances. Volkov was not the kind of man who would rely on a standard configuration. There would be a trap somewhere, a hidden fail-safe designed to catch anyone who thought they could simply cut a wire and walk away. He was too clever, too experienced, too malicious to make things that easy. 322, 321, 320. She pulled out her multi-tool and carefully exposed a section of the yellow wire, peeling back the insulation to reveal the copper conductor beneath. The work required precision, a steady hand that did not flinch despite the countdown ticking away in her peripheral vision. What she saw confirmed her suspicions. The yellow wire was a decoy, connected to nothing, designed to waste precious seconds and create false confidence. If she had cut it, thinking she was disabling the timer, the countdown would have continued uninterrupted while she celebrated a victory that never happened. Volkov had probably built a dozen devices just like this one. He had probably watched a dozen technicians make the same mistake, trusting their training instead of their instincts, cutting the obvious wire and dying when the bomb exploded anyway. He was a student of human nature as well as explosives, and he knew that most people would take the easy path when it was offered. The real trigger was hidden elsewhere. Elena examined the base of the timer, looking for secondary connections that might not be immediately visible. She ran her fingers along the seams of the housing, feeling for wires or components that did not belong. The metal was cold against her skin, smooth and unyielding, revealing nothing. Then she found it. There. A thin wire, almost invisible against the dark surface of the canister, running from the back of the timer housing to a small circuit board mounted on the opposite side of the release valve. The wire was hair-thin, probably 28 gauge, the kind of wire that was easy to overlook in the chaos of a bomb disposal situation. A redundancy system designed to ensure detonation even if the primary circuit was disabled. 258, 0257, 0256. She was running out of time. The seconds were bleeding away, each one bringing them closer to disaster. Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the pressure of mortality pressing down on her like a physical weight. But she did not panic. Panic was the enemy of precision. Her father had taught her that. Dalton had taught her that, and she had learned it herself in 100 different situations where the difference between life and death was measured in heartbeats. A sound from outside the truck made her look up. Dalton was slumped against the tailgate, his face pale and slick with sweat. The bandages around his midsection were soaked through with fresh blood, the wound from Volkov's escape reopened by the exertion of the past hour. He was dying, Elena realized. Slowly, perhaps, but surely. Without immediate medical attention, he would bleed out right here in the desert. Sarge. She kept her voice calm, professional, even though her heart was breaking. How are you holding up? Dalton tried to smile, but the expression came out as more of a grimace. Been better. He coughed, and a thin trickle of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Focus on the bomb, Ace. I am fine. He was not fine, they both knew it. But there was nothing Elena could do for him right now. If she stopped working on the device, if she left her position to help him, everyone would die. The canister would rupture, the agent would spread, and thousands of innocent people would pay the price for her compassion. It was an impossible choice. Save the man who had become like a father to her, or save the strangers she would never meet. Her heart said one thing, her duty said another. 231, 230, 229. Dalton seemed to sense her hesitation. He pushed himself up straighter, his jaw set with determination, his eyes finding hers through the darkness. Do not even think about it, he said. His voice was weak, but the steel in it was unmistakable. You finished the job. That is an order. Sarge, I have been doing this for 30 years, Ace. I know how it ends. He paused, drawing a ragged breath. But I also know that there are things more important than any one person's life, even mine. So you do what you were trained to do. You stop that bomb, and you do not let my stubbornness be the reason thousands of people die. Elena felt tears burning in her eyes, but she blinked them away. There was no time for grief. There was no time for anything except the task at hand. I'm going to save you, Sarge, both of you. Dalton did not respond. He simply nodded once and closed his eyes, trusting her to do what needed to be done, trusting her with his life and the lives of everyone within range of the biochemical agent. Elena turned back to the device. 215, 214, 213. The redundancy circuit was the key. If she could disable it without triggering the failsafe, she could stop the countdown. But the circuit was protected by the same kind of collapsing mechanism she had encountered at the bridge, a continuous current loop that would trigger the detonator if interrupted. She needed to bypass the circuit before she could disable it. She needed to create an alternate pathway for the current, one that would maintain the loop even when she cut the primary connection. Her fingers found the wire she needed, a thin strand of copper that connected the redundancy circuit to the main timer. If she could splice in a secondary connection, she could reroute the current and disable the failsafe. But she did not have the tools. Her equipment had been lost in the ambush, scattered across the desert floor when the IEDs detonated. All she had was her multi-tool and the contents of her pockets. 152, 151, 0150. Think, Ace. Her father's voice again, calm and patient. There is always a solution. You just have to find it. She emptied her pockets onto the floor of the truck bed. A pen light, a spare magazine for her rifle, Dalton's poker chip, the one he had given her before the mission, a length of paracord, and there at the bottom of her cargo pocket, a small coil of wire she had picked up at the relay station and forgotten about. The wire was thin, probably meant for some minor repair job that never happened. But it was copper, and it was conductive, and right now it was the most valuable thing in the world. Elena stripped the insulation from both ends of the wire with her teeth, working as quickly as she dared. The countdown continued its relentless march toward zero, each second a reminder of how little time she had left. 133, 132, 131. She attached one end of the wire to the redundancy circuit, creating an alternate pathway for the current. Her hands were shaking now, the accumulated stress of the past hours finally taking its toll. She forced them to steady, forced herself to breathe, forced herself to focus on the task and nothing else. The second connection was more difficult. She had to attach the wire to the main timer without disturbing the primary circuit, without interrupting the current flow, without triggering the fail-safe that would end everything in a flash of fire, in a cloud of death. 118, 117, 116. Carefully, she pressed the stripped end of the wire against the terminal on the timer. The connection held. Current flowed through the bypass, maintaining the loop, keeping the fail-safe dormant. Now for the hard part. Elena positioned her multi-tools blade against the primary wire connecting the redundancy circuit to the detonator. This was the moment of truth. If she had made a mistake, if her bypass was not working properly, cutting this wire would trigger the explosion immediately. She thought about her father, working on a similar device in a dusty compound in Afghanistan. She thought about the 5 minutes he had been given and how close he had come to success before Volkov detonated the bomb remotely. She thought about all the things she wished she could have said to him, all the moments they would never share, all the futures that had been stolen from them both. 058, 057, 056. She thought about Dalton, bleeding out behind her, trusting her to save him. She thought about Preacher and Tommy and all the other soldiers who had followed her into this nightmare, who had fought beside her and bled beside her and believed in her when she did not believe in herself. She thought about the thousands of people who would die if she failed, the families, the children, the grandparents who would never see their grandchildren grow up, all of them depending on her, though they would never know her name. 047, 046, or 45. Elena took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and cut the wire. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. The timer continued counting. The canister remained intact. The world held its breath. Then the display flickered. 044, 043. The numbers froze. Elena stared at the timer, not daring to believe what she was seeing. The countdown had stopped. The detonator was disabled. The bypass had worked. She had done it. But even as relief flooded through her, she realized the job was not finished. The timer was stopped, but the explosive charge was still active. The canister was still pressurized. Any disturbance, any jolt or shock could still trigger the release valve and unleash the death that waited inside. She needed to remove the explosive charge completely. She needed to make the canister safe before anyone could move it. 043. The frozen numbers mocked her, reminding her that time was still passing, that the danger was not over, that one wrong move could still kill everyone. Elena turned her attention to the explosive charge itself. It was a small block of plastic explosive, probably Semtex or something similar, pressed against the release valve and held in place by a magnetic clamp. The detonator was embedded in the center of the block, a small cylinder of metal and wire that would convert the timer's signal into the explosion that would rupture the valve. She could not simply pull the charge away. The magnetic clamp might be connected to a secondary trigger, a motion sensor or a pressure switch that would detonate the explosive if it was disturbed. She needed to disable the detonator first, render it inert, before she could safely remove the charge. The detonator was the simplest part of the device, a standard commercial unit that she recognized from her training. Remove the blasting cap, and the explosive would become nothing more than an inert block of putty. But the blasting cap was buried inside the Semtex, hidden from view, protected by the explosive itself. To reach it, she would have to dig into the block with her hands, scooping away the material until she could grasp the tiny cylinder and pull it free. It was dangerous. Any spark, any friction, any source of ignition could set off the Semtex and end everything. But it was also her only option. Elena took a deep breath and began to work. The Semtex was soft and pliable, like modeling clay that had been left out in the sun. She dug into it with her fingers, carefully pushing the material aside, exposing the blasting cap millimeter by millimeter. The work was painstaking, requiring a level of precision that pushed her concentration to its absolute limits. Outside the truck, she could hear voices. Preacher was calling for a medic. Tommy was trying to raise command on the radio, his voice tight with desperation. The firefight was over, the enemy forces either dead or fled. But the victory felt hollow with Dalton bleeding out and the biochemical agent still threatening to kill them all. Her fingers found the blasting cap, a small cylinder no bigger than her little finger, connected to the timer by a thin wire that she had already disabled. All she had to do was pull it free, and the device would be completely safe. She grasped the cap between her thumb and forefinger, pulled gently, feeling it shift in the Semtex. A little more resistance, the material clinging to the metal, reluctant to let go of its deadly treasure. Then it came free. Elena held the blasting cap in her hand, staring at it in the dim light. Such a small thing, a few grams of metal and explosive, no bigger than a cigarette. And yet it had almost killed thousands of people. It had almost ended her life, and Dalton's life, and the lives of everyone she cared about. She dropped the cap on the floor of the truck bed and turned toward the tailgate. Dalton was slumped against the metal, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow and irregular. Blood had pooled beneath him, soaking into the desert sand, a dark stain that seemed to grow larger with every passing second. Sarge. Elena scrambled out of the truck and dropped to her knees beside him. Sarge, can you hear me? Dalton's eyes fluttered open. His gaze was unfocused at first, then slowly sharpened as he recognized her face hovering above him. Did you stop it? His voice was barely a whisper. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, Sarge, I stopped it. It is over. A smile crossed Dalton's pale features, genuine and warm despite the pain. Good. He coughed, and more blood appeared on his lips. I knew you could do it. Medic! Elena turned toward the voices outside, screaming with everything she had left. I need a medic here now. Preacher was the first to arrive, his face grim as he took in the scene. Behind him, Tommy and the other survivors of the ambush were converging on their position, their weapons lowered, their expressions a mixture of relief and concern. Is it safe? Preacher asked. The device is neutralized, Elena said. But Sarge is in bad shape. He needs surgery. Now. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Someone had finally managed to break through the communications jamming and reach command. A medevac helicopter was inbound, its ETA less than 10 minutes. The other soldiers were securing the perimeter, collecting the wounded, accounting for the dead. Elena stayed with Dalton, holding his hand, talking to him to keep him conscious. She told him about the device, about how she had used the wire from the relay station, about the bypass she had created to fool the failsafe. She told him about her father, about the lessons he had taught her, about how those lessons had saved her life tonight. Your old man would be proud, Dalton said weakly. I know I am. You are going to be fine, Sarge. The helicopter is almost here. Dalton shook his head slightly. We both know how this works, Ace. Sometimes you make it, sometimes you do not. You are going to make it. Maybe. Dalton's eyes found hers, and for a moment she saw past the pain and the blood loss, saw the man who had mentored her and believed in her and become the closest thing to a father she had known since Robert Reeves died. But if I do not, I want you to know something. Elena squeezed his hand. What is it? You reminded me why I kept doing this. All those years, all those deployments, all those soldiers I trained and led and buried. I used to wonder if any of it mattered, if I was making a difference or just going through the motions. The sound of helicopter rotors reached her ears, distant but growing louder. She did not look away from Dalton's face. You matter, Sarge. Everything you did matters. I know that now. Dalton's voice was fading, his grip on her hand growing weaker. Because I see it in you. Everything I tried to teach. Everything I hoped to pass on. It is all there, Ace. You are the soldier I always wanted to be. The helicopter landed in a storm of dust and rotor wash. Medical personnel poured out, rushing toward them with stretchers and trauma bags. Elena stepped back to let them work, watching as they loaded Dalton onto the stretcher and carried him toward the waiting aircraft. Just before they lifted him inside, Dalton raised his hand weakly. Finish it, Ace. He had to shout to be heard over the rotors. Finish what we started. Then he was gone, the helicopter lifting into the night sky and banking toward the field hospital at FOB Sentinel. Elena watched until the navigation lights disappeared into the darkness, until the sound of the rotors faded to silence, until she was alone with her thoughts and the weight of everything that had happened. The sun was rising by the time the recovery teams arrived. Golden light spread across the desert, painting the sand in shades of amber and rose, transforming the blasted landscape into something almost beautiful. Elena stood beside the truck that held the biochemical canisters, watching the specialists work to secure the deadly cargo. Colonel Holt arrived with the main force, his command vehicle rolling to a stop at the edge of the perimeter. He stepped out and surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of a man who had seen countless battlefields, who knew how to read the signs of victory and defeat in the arrangement of bodies and vehicles and equipment. His gaze found Elena, and he walked toward her with a purpose that suggested he already knew what she had done. Specialist Reeves. He stopped in front of her, his expression unreadable. I have been receiving reports for the past hour. They tell me that you single-handedly neutralized a biochemical weapon that was seconds away from detonation. They tell me that you saved the lives of everyone within 5 kilometers of this position, including several hundred civilians in the nearest town. Elena stood at attention, her uniform stained with blood and dust, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline that had kept her going through the long night. I did what I was trained to do, sir. No, Holt shook his head slowly. You did considerably more than that. What you did tonight was not in any training manual. It was not part of any protocol. It was the kind of improvisation that separates the truly exceptional from the merely competent. He paused and something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been admiration or respect or the recognition of a kindred spirit. I knew your father, he said quietly. We served together years ago before you were born. He was one of the finest soldiers I ever met. A man who always found a way to do the impossible. Thank you, sir. I see him in you. Holt's voice was softer now, almost gentle. The same determination, the same refusal to accept defeat, the same willingness to sacrifice everything for the mission and the people around you. Elena felt tears threatening again, but she held them back. Not here, not now. There would be time for grief later, time for processing everything that had happened. But right now, she needed to be a soldier. What happened to Volkov? She asked. Holt's expression darkened. We tracked his blood trail for about 2 kilometers into the desert. It led to a cave complex in the rocks to the north. He paused. We found him inside. Dead. Blood loss and infection from the gunshot wound. He did not make it through the night. Elena absorbed the information without emotion. She had expected to feel something when she heard that Volkov was dead. Relief, perhaps, or satisfaction, or closure. Instead, she felt nothing at all, just a hollow emptiness where the rage and grief had been. It is over then. It is over. Holt nodded. The man who killed your father is dead. The weapons he was transporting have been secured. The network he worked for has been exposed and is being dismantled as we speak. You accomplished everything you set out to do, Specialist. Elena looked at the truck, at the canisters that had almost killed thousands of people. She thought about the 5 minutes she had been given, the 5 minutes that had felt like an eternity and an instant at the same time. She thought about her father, about the 5 minutes he had been given, about how close he had come to success before Volkov ended his life. My father ran out of time, she said quietly. He was 2 minutes away from saving himself. Yes, I had 43 seconds left when I stopped the countdown. Elena looked at Holt. 43 seconds is not a lot of time, sir. Holt was silent for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, the kind that held medals and commendations. No, he agreed, but it was enough. He opened the box and showed her what was inside. A bronze star, the medal awarded for heroic or meritorious achievement in a combat zone. Elena stared at it, not quite comprehending what it meant. This is not official yet, Holt said. There will be paperwork, ceremonies, the usual bureaucratic nonsense that the Army loves so much. But I wanted you to know what you did tonight will not be forgotten. Elena took the box, feeling its weight in her hand. Such a small thing, she thought, a bit of metal and ribbon, and yet it represented everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had risked to stop a monster and save the people she loved. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me, Specialist. Holt smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, the expression reached his eyes. You earned it. The news about Dalton came 3 days later. Elena was sitting in the waiting room of the field hospital, the same plastic chair she had occupied after the bridge incident, staring at the same white walls and listening to the same hum of fluorescent lights. She had been there for hours, unable to leave, unable to do anything except wait and hope and bargain with a God she was not sure she believed in anymore. The surgeon emerged from the operating room looking exhausted but triumphant, his scrubs stained with blood, his face bearing the unmistakable expression of a man who had just won a battle against death itself. He is going to make it. The words hit her like a physical blow, driving the breath from her lungs and the strength from her legs. She had been preparing herself for the worst, steeling herself against the grief that she was sure was coming. She had already planned what she would say at his funeral, how she would honor his memory, how she would carry on without the man who had become like a second father to her. To hear that Dalton would survive, that he would recover, that he would live to fight another day, was almost more than she could process. The tears came then, the ones she had been holding back for days, streaming down her face in a flood of relief and gratitude that she could not control. "He lost a lot of blood," the surgeon continued, his voice gentle and understanding. "And there was significant damage to his internal organs. He will need months of rehabilitation before he is back to full strength. But Master Sergeant Dalton is one of the toughest patients I have ever worked on. He refused to give up, even when things looked hopeless." "That sounds like him," Elena managed to say. "He is asking for you." The surgeon smiled. "Personally, I think he should be resting. But Master Sergeant Dalton is not the kind of man who takes orders well. Not even from doctors." Elena almost laughed through her tears. "No, sir, he is not." She found Dalton propped up in bed, looking pale and tired but undeniably alive. His torso was wrapped in fresh bandages, his arm was connected to an IV drip, and various monitors beeped softly around him, tracking his vital signs with mechanical precision. The room smelled of antiseptic and hospital food, a combination that Elena had come to associate with survival and recovery. But his eyes were clear and sharp, and the smile he gave her when she entered was the warmest thing she had seen in weeks. It was the smile of a man who had looked death in the face and told it to go to hell. "There she is." His voice was weak, but the familiar gruff affection was unmistakable. "The woman who saved my life." Again. Elena sat down in the chair beside his bed, reaching out to take his hand in hers. His skin was cool to the touch, but his grip was strong, stronger than she would have expected from someone who had lost as much blood as he had. "I think we are even now, Sarge." "Even?" Dalton snorted, and the sound was so normal, so him, that Elena felt fresh tears prickling at her eyes. "You pulled me out of a firefight. You stopped a biochemical weapon from killing half the sector. And you did it all while I was lying on the ground bleeding like a stuck pig. That is not even. That is you being a damn hero. I learned from the best." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that only exists between people who have shared something profound. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Dalton was quiet for a moment, his expression softening in a way she had rarely seen. "I heard about Volkov." Elena nodded. "He did not make it. Bled out in a cave about 2 kilometers from where we fought. They found his body the next morning." "How do you feel?" She considered the question carefully, searching for the honest answer. "I thought I would feel relieved," she said finally. "Satisfied, like something had been completed. But mostly I just feel tired, like I have been running a marathon that never ends, and now that it is over, I do not know what to do with myself." "That is normal," Dalton said, squeezing her hand. "Revenge is not what it is cracked up to be. It does not bring back the people you lost. It does not undo the damage that was done. All it does is close a chapter, and then you have to figure out what comes next." "What comes next?" Dalton smiled, and there was wisdom in that smile, the accumulated experience of 30 years of service and sacrifice. "That is up to you, Ace, but if I were you, I would start by taking some leave. Going somewhere that does not involve sand and bullets and people trying to kill you. Maybe visit home. Remember what it is like to be a normal human being for a while." Elena thought about home. Kentucky, the house where she had grown up, with the big oak tree in the front yard and the porch swing where her mother used to sit on summer evenings. The garage where her father had taught her everything she knew about explosives and patience and the value of a steady hand. It had been years since she had been back. Years since she had visited the graves of her parents. The quiet cemetery at Fort Campbell where they lay side by side, together in death as they had been in life. "Maybe I will," she said. "Good." Dalton reached out and squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "And Ace, whatever you decide to do next, wherever you go, whatever challenges you face, remember one thing." "What is that, Sarge?" 5 minutes. His eyes held hers, warm and wise and full of the accumulated experience of 30 years of service. That is all any of us get. 5 minutes to make the decisions that matter. 5 minutes to prove what we are made of. 5 minutes to save the people we love. The rest is just waiting. Elena squeezed his hand back, feeling the bond between them, the connection that went deeper than rank or duty or circumstance. I know, Sarge. I learned that from my father, and I learned it from you. He taught you well. So did you. 6 months passed. Elena stood at the front of a training room at Fort Lee, Virginia, looking out at the 12 young soldiers who were about to begin their careers as explosive ordnance disposal technicians. They were fresh-faced and eager, their uniforms crisp and new, their eyes bright with the kind of idealism that only inexperience could sustain. She was no longer a specialist. The Bronze Star had come with a promotion to Sergeant E5, along with a transfer to the EOD Training Command. Colonel Holt had recommended her personally, citing her exceptional performance in the field and her demonstrated ability to think creatively under pressure. She had accepted the assignment without hesitation. This was where she belonged. This was how she could make the biggest difference. Not by defusing one bomb at a time, but by training the next generation of technicians who would defuse thousands. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "My name is Sergeant Elena Reeves. For the next 12 weeks, I will be your instructor for advanced explosive recognition and disposal." The recruits sat up straighter, sensing that this was not going to be an ordinary training session. Before we begin, there is something you need to understand." Elena walked slowly along the front of the room, making eye contact with each recruit in turn. "In this job, you will face situations that seem impossible. You will be given challenges that appear to have no solution. You will be told that you have 5 minutes to save lives, and you will wonder if 5 minutes is enough." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Let me tell you about 5 minutes. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn poker chip, the one Dalton had given her before the mission that changed everything. "A man I admire once told me that 5 minutes is a lifetime if you know how to use it. He was right. 5 minutes is enough time to solve any problem, defeat any challenge, save any life. But only if you know how to focus. Only if you know how to prioritize. Only if you refuse to give up, no matter how hopeless things seem." One of the recruits raised his hand, a young man barely 20, with the earnest expression of someone who still believed that hard work and determination could solve any problem. "Sergeant, what if 5 minutes is not enough?" Elena smiled, and for a moment she saw her father standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice in her ear. "Then you make it enough. You focus. You adapt. You find a way. Because failure is not an option. Not in this job. Not when lives are on the line." She set the poker chip on the lectern in front of her, where she could see it throughout the lesson. A reminder of everything she had learned, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had become. "Now, let us begin." That night, after the training session was over and the recruits had returned to their barracks, Elena drove out to the military cemetery at Fort Campbell. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, as she walked between the rows of white headstones to the place where her parents lay. Her father's grave was on the left, marked by a simple stone that bore his name, his rank, and the dates of his service. Her mother's grave was beside it, the headstones close enough to touch. Elena stood between them for a long moment, feeling the weight of their absence in the warmth of their memory. "I found him," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, meant only for the two people who could no longer hear it. "The man who killed you, I found him and I stopped him, and I survived." The wind stirred the grass around the graves, a gentle rustling that almost sounded like a response. "I understand now what you were trying to teach me." Elena addressed her father directly, speaking to the stone as if it were the man himself. About the 5 minutes, about focus and precision and the refusal to give up. "You were not just teaching me how to defuse bombs, you were teaching me how to live." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the bronze star that Colonel Holt had given her. The metal gleamed in the fading light, its surface polished to a high shine. "They gave me this for what I did, for stopping the bomb and saving the people and capturing the weapons. But I think it belongs to you too, because everything I learned, everything I became, started with you." She knelt and placed the medal at the base of her father's headstone, pressing it into the soft earth until it was secure. "I am going to keep teaching," she said, "the way you taught me. I am going to train the next generation of technicians, and I am going to make sure they understand what 5 minutes really means. And when they face their own impossible situations, when they are given their own 5-minute windows, they will be ready because of you. Elena stood and took one last look at the graves of her parents. The sun had almost set now, the sky darkening to purple and black, the first stars beginning to appear. Soon it would be night again, another darkness, another challenge waiting somewhere in the world for someone brave enough to face it. But Elena Reeves was not afraid of the dark, not anymore. She turned and walked back toward her car, leaving the cemetery behind her, but carrying its lessons in her heart. The road ahead was uncertain, full of dangers she could not predict and challenges she could not imagine. But she was ready for whatever came next. Because she had learned the most important lesson of all. 5 minutes is a lifetime, and she knew exactly how to use it. The end.